Number 10. Jean Grey was resting the whole time. After Jean Grey died as part of the Phoenix Saga, everyone was left flabbergasted. During the story, we'd seen Jean merge with the Phoenix Force, become insanely powerful, lose control over this power, become corrupted and dark, basically become a huge supervillain, and finally sacrifice herself, knowing that if she didn't, it would only end badly. Or worse than badly, because it was already pretty bad. Jean Grey, one of the original X-Men team, was dead. Or so it seemed. Later on, Marvel would want to revive the original X-Men team and bring them together on a new team and comic series called X-Factor. So Jean needed to come back to life. But hey, she was dead. So we got the added story to explain that the version of Jean that had died wasn't really her, but was a separate entity known as Phoenix. Sort of this merged thing. Wasn't really Jean. Jean herself was resting comfortably in a pod beneath the ocean, still lived, and would be able to return. Yay. Number 9. Tony Stark was adopted. Yep, that's a thing that happened. I'm just wondering if this one will show up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I can't deny that if we get an Arno as a result, an Arno Stark, I would actually not be too upset with that, even though this retcon's pretty weird. The reason this retcon was such a terrible retcon for Tony was that his parents and their loss always remained a great catalyst and huge emotional plot point for him. Now, of course, just because he was adopted doesn't mean that he can't still love his parents as much as he did and still be as emotionally affected by their death. That's not what I'm saying. But his parents also had a naturally born son that they hid from Tony, who was born before they adopted Tony, and he also didn't know that he was even adopted. Also, there were aliens and alien tech involved in Arno's birth, which explains why this all had to be a secret, but also it's just a lot. All in all, this revelation greatly changed the way Tony saw his parents and made their relationship more complex. And I don't know if either of those things needed to happen. Number 8. Hail Hydra. One of the most shocking moments in Marvel's comic history was when it was revealed that Captain America was actually a sleeper agent for Hydra the whole time. Say what? The guy who for years was diametrically opposed to Hydra and all their beliefs, who had tried and succeeded to foil their plots countless times, was a Hydra agent? How could this be? Well, apparently all those wins were a part of his doing a very good job to convince us all and trust him so that he could stab us in the back at the right moment and take over America, becoming Hydra Supreme. Fortunately, this evil version of Captain America would later be revealed to have been created by Kobik, a living sentient version of the Cosmic Cube who was manipulated into making this retcon happen. What's more, the true Captain America still existed within the shards of the Cosmic Cube and would return once more to defeat his evil self, fixing the timeline. So, I mean, at least this retcon ended up not staying permanent, but still, it's pretty weird. Number 7. Zorn. Okay, so I was actually going to make the title of this point a little more explanatory, but then I realized how long that would actually make the title of this point. Okay, so Zorn was basically a character who showed up in the comics who was a mutant who always needed to wear a mask. Because of this, we never saw Zorn's face, leading many to wonder who was really under the mask. Although I think most people just thought, well, it's probably a new mutant, because, you know, we get new mutants added to the comics every day. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone. In a dramatic twist, it was Magneto. But no, of course, this is comics, so it had to be someone that we already knew. In a dramatic twist, it was revealed to be Magneto, who had infiltrated Xavier's school in order to rally up mutant support and help him create an army. He then destroyed New York, shot Emma Frost, killed Jean, and was eventually killed by Wolverine. Later on, however, Magneto would turn up again because, well, he's Magneto, and writers wanted to inch him closer to that line between villain and anti-hero again, so they basically retconned Magneto's involvement in all of this. It turns out there was a real Zorn, and it was actually Zorn's brother impersonating Zorn, impersonating Magneto, who was really to blame. Wow. Just wow. Number 7. Professor X married Mystique. Some retcons that are really strange come from film inspiration. As a lot of people discussed in the comments, many feel that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, for example, would still be mutants today if it wasn't for their being introduced in the MCU's Avengers franchise, which didn't have the rights to include mutants, so we had to kind of unmutant them. I feel as though the case was possibly similar for this weird, secret retcon. In 2013's Uncanny X-Men issue 24, we learned of Mystique and Charles Xavier's secret marriage, meaning that the child we saw Mystique gave birth to while in the guise of Moira McTaggart was likely one willfully conceived, as opposed to Mystique tricking Charles into sleeping with her, which would have been super weird and pretty not good in my opinion. In the X-Men prequel films such as First Class, which came out in 2011, we see a different kind of relationship between Raven and Charles. We get this weird love triangle between Charles, Raven, and Eric, and it seems more of that likely influenced this weird retcon plot point revealed in the comics, in Charles's will. Number 6. Thanos. Number 1 dad? Thanos has never really been known as a caring and kind person. Even the people he keeps close to him are never really fully safe from his wrath. Faithful servants, family members, to Thanos, everyone is pretty much disposable. The same could be said for his adopted daughter Gamora, who he hardened and transformed into a killer until she ended up later rebelling. In the 2019 Thanos series, however, we learn how Gamora's relationship with her father was, well, more complex. How he actually, in his own way, was kind of a good father to her. This series also highlights how much they both cared for each other, despite the fact that an Infinity Gauntlet, which happened in the 90s, pre this series, but in terms of continuity would have taken place after this, Thanos seems to not show any regard for his adopted daughter's life. So it's kind of a retcon. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Number 5. Spider-Man's non-sister. So this is kind of another retcon that for me is similar to Nadia's. I like the idea of this character, but the whole story involving her is, well, it's pretty wacky. Teresa showed up in Amazing Spider-Man Family Business claiming to be Teresa Parker, Peter's sister. She believed she was the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's parents, and we got a few cool adventures with her, assuming this belief to be true. She was retconned into existence, but honestly, I thought she was kind of a cool retcon to add in, so I was cool with that. However, things got weirder when we learned that the secret sister we'd never heard of till now was all a lie, and that Teresa actually wasn't who she said she was, despite what she herself had been manipulated to believe. It was all a trick, and Mentalo had manipulated Teresa into believing it herself. It was all part of Kingpin's plan to basically lure Peter to a tomb. And we don't actually even know who Teresa's parents are now. It's still a mystery. They even manipulated how Peter saw Teresa, making her appear more like him, so she'd look more like his sister. It's weird. I wish she was actually his sister. That would have been cooler, I think. Number 4. Spider Destiny. Now you know me, I love the Spider-Verse, I love spider totems, but not all fans share my bizarre obsession with the Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon stories and the villains known as the Inheritors. I swear I'm like the only person that really loves the Inheritors. If you also love them, let me know in the comments. Show yourselves. With these stories came a pretty huge retcon, which basically implied via learning about the Great Web and the spider totems placed within it that every spider, man, or person had a kind of destiny to become that spider person. In other words, Peter Parker didn't have a freak accident, he was actually destined to become Spider-Man. It was fate! Many fans were not a fan of this change to his origins, as they felt it detracted from what makes Peter Parker so appealing, that he's just an average kid who got a freak spider bite that gave him powers, as opposed to it being all ordained. Number 3. Kang. Sometimes we talk about retcons that are ridiculous because they hurt the overall story. Other times there are retcons that feel like they don't really need to happen, and then there are those that just cause more confusion than really necessary. That's sort of the case with Kang. Kang the Conqueror was a villain who was first introduced in Avengers issue 8 in 1964. He is known for being a time-traveling villain who enjoys sitting and floating around while menacing other people. As time went on, however, we'd come to discover, due to the fact that he's a time traveler, the Kang was actually a bunch of other people, including Immortus and even Iron Lad. While these retcons were sometimes interesting, they don't really add much to his story, and at this point Kang being revealed as just about anyone is so old hat, it's kind of lost its shock value as well. Now we're gonna get him in the MCU, I don't know what that's gonna be like. Could be weird, could be great. Number 2. Aunt May's death. Remember when Aunt May died, but it wasn't really Aunt May but an actress who had actually died while impersonating Aunt May? Yeah, that was a weird villainous plot. What we saw in the comics as an elderly Aunt May's death was later retconned into being one of the weirdest and most elaborate plots of Green Goblin's criminal career. It was later revealed that the woman who was dead and buried and who we thought had been Aunt May was actually an elderly actress who happened to be on her deathbed and who had agreed to take on one last role in order to torment Spider-Man? Prove how great of an actress she was? Her motives are pretty foggy. Maybe Green Goblin agreed to pay any surviving relatives of hers a ton of cash? I honestly don't know. What had really happened was this actress had been genetically altered to exactly match Aunt May's genes, meaning no one at the hospital suspected this imposter to be a fake. She died after revealing to Peter that she knew he was Spider-Man, and was even buried in Aunt May's intended plot next to Uncle Ben for a time. That is, of course, until we all learned that Aunt May was really still alive, and this had been some kind of bizarre ruse. Number 1. Clone Saga. I won't deny that in my time on this channel I've come to actually somewhat love elements of the Clone Saga. I originally disliked Clone Saga when I started working here, but I very much have come to appreciate parts of the story and to acknowledge that without Clone Saga, we wouldn't have some very awesome characters like Ben Reilly and Kane Parker. However, one thing I still cannot get over is how long Marvel spent tricking everyone with this story. People spent 20 years thereabouts thinking they were reading Spider-Man, as in Peter Parker, only to find out that all those stories were not his, but actually belonged to a clone. Granted, at least it was a pretty cool clone who we'd all come to love after. But at the time, this was a pretty shocking and frustrating revelation after years of stories, and it left a lot of fans feeling betrayed at the time.
And we're kicking us off today with the Clone Saga. Clone Saga is nearly 6,000 pages of Spider-Man. Sure, but don't be fooled because a large portion of that is unnecessary plot twists, filler, character deaths and resurrections, pure confusion, and to add to the whole thing, it also ends up being very expensive if you want to acquire it all physically. Trust me. To cut to the chase, back in the 70s, a villain called the Jackal cloned both Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. Then, in the 90s, Peter's clone is found to be alive. Confusion ensues as to who the real Spider-Man actually is, then Green Goblin comes back from 20 years of being in the grave and is revealed to be behind it all because reasons. The real problem with the Clone Saga, from what I have read, is that it was originally supposed to last 7 or 8 months and then end with Amazing Spider-Man 400 having Peter retire. But increased sales led management to force the story to keep going for over 2 years. What sucks is that if you strip away a lot of the filler and unnecessary stuff, it's actually a pretty decent story. It's actually got a ton of great moments. It gave us both Ben Reilly and was the springboard for Mayday Parker's Spider-Girl, but it's just so damn long. Now in the 90s, comics had this really weird little phase of being super extreme. Everything was all dark and gritty and hella over the top, prioritizing style over substance, and one of the best ways I can show that is Maximum Carnage. The story was absolutely popular among readers, we can't doubt that, but it was one heck of a story to follow. Spread out over the 4 concurrent Spider-Man titles of the time, the storyline involved Carnage and 4 other villains facing off against, get this, Spider-Man, Venom, Cloak and Dagger, Morbius, Black Cat, Deathlock, Firestar, Nightwatch, Iron Fist, and Captain America. Maximum was the opportune word for this series. It honestly had very little plot. It had to do with something about a killing spree and one of the villains controlling people's minds to make them violent, and Spider-Man and Venom didn't get along but worked together anyways. Those are the main takeaways, and it lasted for 14 issues. Was it extreme to the nth degree? Yeah, which makes it fun, but it doesn't mean it's good. The Spider-Man story called Chapter 1 isn't so much of a storyline that we can really critique because it's essentially the very same Spider-Man origin story that we all know. Chapter 1 was a series that retold the first stories from Amazing Spider-Man in an updated format, changing the setting from the 60s to the 80s and 90s. The intention was pretty similar to Ultimate Spider-Man, except like all the basic plots of the stories are kept pretty much intact, and it was meant to be the canon that the new stories would refer to whenever they did a flashback. So, if all the plot points are intact, what's the difference? Exactly. There are a few cosmetic changes and some details are changed, like Doc Ock and Spider-Man getting damaged in the same explosion, and the really weird change of Norman Osborn and Sandman becoming cousins because their hair is similar, but the stories themselves are very similar to the originals, and most of the parts that made them dated in the first place don't even really change. Also, there's an inner monologue from the guy who took out Uncle Ben that goes on for way too long.
Number 6. Ugly equals evil. That's what Thanos' retcon taught us. Yep. Thanos' backstory was added in detail in the series Thanos Rising, and what many fans were surprised to learn was that his mother was apparently driven mad by her newborn baby's hideous appearance, and because of his appearance, claimed that she needed to kill him. That's pretty terrible. She sensed basically that because he was ugly, he would also be supremely evil. And the really shocking part of this was, of course, that she was right. But also, what the heck? Just because you don't like the look of your baby doesn't mean it should deserve to die. Fortunately, a retcon was later added to fix this when it was changed to it not being the baby's appearance but to a specific deviant gene in the child's genetic code that concerned both of his parents instead. Still, not great, just analyzing your baby's genes and being like, we already know you're gonna be evil. But it's better than it just being about the ugliness in appearance as the pure reason for condemnation, I guess. Number 5. Doom is never wrong. Some people like Dr. Doom a little too much. I'm probably guilty as being one of those people. To the point that they can't let him be flawed. Doom must be perfect. Well, while Doom may believe that, the reality is it's his flaws that actually help to make him such a great character, and also are important because they are a part of the reason for his villainous nature. Originally, his vendetta started against the Fantastic Four, and more specifically Reed Richards, years ago, when Reed tried to give him pointers on a device he was building. Reed warned Doom that it was unstable, but Doom didn't listen. The device ended up exploding because, well, Richards had been right, scarring Doom's face. Unable to blame himself due to his huge ego, Doom decided to blame Reed, and thus a villain was born. However, retcons have come into play a few times in regards to his origins as to whose fault the device exploding really was. In one retcon, it's actually implied that it's Mephisto's fault, but if that's true, then why has Doom hated Reed so much for pretty much forever? Another retcon implied that Ben Grimm possibly intentionally sabotaged Doom's machine, which is an even worse retcon because it makes Grimm, normally a very lovable character, look like a jerk. Both of these retcons help to buff out Doom's flaws at the expense of making his feuds illogical. Number 4. Peter and MJ's marriage never happened. During the story One More Day, Peter made a pact with Mephisto to ensure that his Aunt May would live. Part of this deal was also that people would forget Peter's secret identity, which was currently out in the open. Although it wasn't like a bargain part of the deal, it was just a thing that would happen. But what did Mephisto want in return for this? Peter to never be a hero again? Did he want his soul? No. No, 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 no. He wanted his marriage? Mephisto wanted to take Peter's marriage to MJ. And by that, I don't mean that he wanted himself to marry MJ, which would actually make, in a weird turn of events, more sense. I mean, he wanted to make it so that their marriage never existed. This was such a strange request that many were left speechless when Peter agreed, and this actually happened. What was likely really going on is that Marvel no longer wanted Peter to be married. Or Joe Quesada never wanted Peter to get married in the first place. They wanted to return to the days when Peter was flying free and single, so this story happened to erase it. Number 3. Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy's relationship. This little frightening retcon was added during the Sin's Past story. It also made Peter look like an insensitive jerk, just for good measure as well. The story here that was added in was that Gwen Stacy had an affair with Norman Osborn, a man who was much older than her at the time and who would go on to be responsible for her death. This affair resulted in Gwen becoming pregnant with twins, which she secretly gave birth to. Norman then raised these children, lying to them that they were actually the children of Spider-Man and Gwen, and that Spider-Man had killed their mother, turning them into misguided villains. This was not a retcon anyone needed, but hey, it was one that we got. Number 2. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were never mutants. If you have been subscribers to our channel for a while, then you likely saw this one coming from a mile away. A list of the worst retcons with Amanda hosting it? I wonder what she's gonna rank high up on that list. And you were right. One of the worst retcons in mutant history for me will always be this. During the events of Axis, it was revealed that Wanda Maximoff and her brother Pyotr, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver respectively, were never the children of Magneto, and as such, never mutants. Instead, we learned that the High Evolutionary abducted them when they were young, experimented on them, and then disguised them as mutants and returned them back to the world. Why? Well, we don't really know, which is part of the reason this is such a terrible retcon. That, and it erased years of meaningful family drama and history, and created a bunch of plot points that no longer really made any sense. Number 1. Snap Wilson. Even worse than my own personal nerd rage towards the retcon of the Maximoff twins, everyone's outrage, my own included, against this retcon. I still can't believe this was a thing that even happened in the comics. Oh my goodness. Sam Wilson in the comics became a good friend of Captain America and was even known as his ally, the superhero Falcon. However, it was revealed that Sam Wilson wasn't actually Sam Wilson, a social worker from New York with falconry skills. This was all a fabrication of the Red Skull, who had used the cosmic cube to turn him into the perfect partner for Captain America as part of an insidious plot. The true persona of Wilson was the criminal, thug, and pimp known as Snap Wilson. What? This would be revealed to Cap as being his true persona, which Cap would then save him from. Yikes. Fortunately, years later we would see a retcon that would basically undo this one, turning the fake persona of Sam Wilson into the real persona for him, and the originally retconned real persona of Snap Wilson into the fake, meaning that Sam Wilson was always Sam Wilson and Snap Wilson was the version created and used by Red Skull. Whew! Thank goodness.
Number 10. No Man's Land. Speaking of Batman, in 1999 we were given the infamous No Man's Land arc. In this story, Gotham is struck by a massive earthquake and is cut off from the rest of the country. The government writes the city off as a lost cause, and the various villains form gangs and begin taking over areas of the city and claiming it as their territory. Batman has to work to bring order back to the city by working with his fellow local heroes as well as the GCPD. The concept seems simple enough, but what can make the story kind of convoluted is its sheer scale. No Man's Land was the most ambitious crossover in DC history, requiring the writers to develop maps and charts to keep track of where everyone was at any given time. The story was told across all of the Batman and Bat Family titles, such as Batman, Detective Comics, Shadow of the Bat, Legends of the Dark Knight, Robin, Catwoman, and Nightwing. The story spans over 100 issues of comics, making keeping up with the story when it came out an expensive and difficult to keep track of endeavor. Number 9. Crisis on Infinite Earths. By today's standards, Crisis on Infinite Earths isn't too convoluted. I mean, we're used to getting a crisis event every few years from DC, but the original is worth talking about. By 1986, the DC multiverse had gotten so convoluted that editorial decided that they needed a way to streamline continuity. The story is almost a last hurrah for the convoluted original continuity, with multiple versions of characters coming together to save the universe. As a result, there is a lot of people and storylines to keep track of before the multiverse is eventually destroyed, leaving only one Earth with all of the histories either being erased or combined. It's convoluted, but with the goal of becoming less convoluted by its end, which is a noble enough goal. Number 8. Green Lantern is difficult to start reading. I'm gonna be brief with this one, and it's more of a personal one. I really like the concept of the Green Lanterns, but every time I try and read any of their stories, I get confused. There are way too many members of the team who you are expected to follow, and then when you finally figure that out, you learn about the yellow, red, blue, and orange lanterns, each with a different emotional spectrum. Add to that the Guardians of the Universe and the central power battery containing a demon named Parallax who makes them unable to affect the color yellow, and there's just a lot to keep track of. I hear that a lot of their stories are really good, but their history is so convoluted and there is so much homework involved in understanding the lore that it makes Green Lantern a really intimidating title to pick up.
Now, this next comic was Marvel attempting to revitalize romance comics that used to be really popular back in the day, and it was also them failing hard. So as I understand it, Marvel's Trouble essentially tells the story of two teenage girls, Mary and May, who end up dating two brothers, Richard and Ben. While May and Ben start getting jiggy with it, essentially a palm reader reveals to Mary that if she does the same thing while she is a teenager still, she will be a mom in her 20s. So because Mary refuses to get jiggy with Richard, he just goes off and cheats on her with May. Shocking, I know. Now May ends up getting pregnant and she straight up runs away, and Mary comes to her aid, eventually even making a deal that Mary will take on the kid when it comes to protect May from her super conservative parents. So May pops out a tiny little boy who gets named Peter, and Mary and Richard take on the kid as their own. And if any of these names sound very familiar, then you probably understand why this was icky and weird and super confusing for a lot of Spider-Man fans. But moving on, this is the story where Otto Octavius, Dr. Octopus, very nearly married Peter Parker's Aunt May. Look, as much as I absolutely love this and think it is incredibly fun, there is no denying the fact that it is silly as heck. The premise for this whole event is that Dr. Octopus wanted to marry Aunt May because he found out that this random woman, because he doesn't know Peter Parker is Spider-Man, has inherited an island that also contained an atomic processing plant, which she didn't even know about. In order for him to get his hands on the power plant, Doc Ock woos this elderly woman to the point of convincing her to marry him, and she agrees to this even though Doc Ock makes zero effort to hide his identity or his 4 mechanical tentacle arms, which are literally popping out of the back of his tuxedo during their wedding ceremony. Yes, it's goofy, but I can't help but like it just like a little bit because of its goofiness. But moving on, I'm convinced that Marvel just hates all the main women in Peter Parker's life, one of which being Aunt May. To be fair, having a woman who was old from the beginning around in Peter Parker's life for years and years and years without her passing away from sheer old age would eventually be a problem that they would have to tackle, and somehow they fumbled it every single time. The final chapter is basically one of many different ways that Marvel has attempted to remove Aunt May from the plane of the living, but it's so unnecessarily confusing that I can't even. Essentially, after another pretty bad story called The Gathering of the Five, Aunt May passed away. Peter Parker got the big sad, and then a whole bunch of stuff involving Romani peoples, evil babies, and mutated wolves all played a part in this stupid scheme that Norman Osborn had to have a dying actress pretend to be Aunt May so that Spider-Man would be completely demoralized, and somehow Spider-Man couldn't tell the difference between this actress and his actual aunt who he lived with a majority of his life. It's stupid. Now listen, the Ultimate Spider-Man run is widely regarded as one of the best Spider-Man runs ever, even if it takes place in the Ultimate Universe, which is rampant with its own problems. The death of Spider-Man's story that takes place in this run is an event that fans absolutely loved. I have the comics, and that was promised to be final and done. In this Ultimate Universe, characters who passed away were not meant to come back. After Peter Parker's passing, we got a new Spider-Man in the form of Miles Morales, and everyone loved that. The only real problem showed up in Miles Morales' Ultimate Spider-Man in the form of Peter Parker back from the grave. He just kinda shows up with zero explanation. His story is incredibly arbitrary, and it goes nowhere, and it's never even explained if this is actually the real true Peter Parker or some imposter or clone. It just kind of happened, and it kind of did a disservice to the death of Spider-Man's story that so many fans, including myself, loved. Now taking up our third spot today, I hate talking about Spider-Man's sins past, I gotta be honest, but it is one of the worst, so let's just get through this, okay? Gwen Stacy losing her life at the hands of the Green Goblin is one of the biggest moments in Peter Parker's life, and it cemented Green Goblin as one of Peter's most ruthless foes. But then, Marvel and J. Michael Straczynski gave us Sins Past, and they just ruined it. 2 twin assassins show up in New York on the trail of the web-slinger, and to cut a sucky story short, these twins were actually the secret children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. Apparently, the reason that Goblin threw Gwen off of a bridge was not because he wanted to mess with Peter Parker. No, it was actually because he wanted to hide the fact that Gwen had recently given birth to Norman's little baby twins and was threatening to not let Norman see them again. And of course, Gwen is forced to go through with the pregnancy, which I'll remind you she showed no signs of at all back in the day, and she gives birth to twins who, because of Norman's irradiated genetics, age really quickly and develop Green Goblin-esque abilities. Basically, Marvel decided that ruining the image and importance of Gwen Stacy was worth it to create an extremely overcomplicated arc that goes nowhere and adds nothing but ickiness to the Spider-Man continuity. Ugh, gross. Moving on to our runner-up. Look, One More Day is a story that completely ruins so many different things about Spider-Man and his mythos. It's honestly not horribly written, and the art is at least kind of like halfway decent at times, but it messed with the mythos in a way that almost everyone finds confusing and pretty unforgivable. Making Peter Parker so unbelievably unable to accept that his elderly Aunt May is going to pass away due to a shot that was meant for him, he goes to as many different places as he can to seek out help, and no one is able to do a single damn thing. In the whole Marvel universe, no one can help May Parker. When he is finally at the point of accepting the inevitable, Mephisto turns up. Mephisto basically gives Peter a solution to his problem, but at a huge cost: the marriage between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Not only do they both end up agreeing to this deal, but Mephisto even gives them and the fans a glimpse at the daughter that they could have had if they only had said no. And like that, 2 decades of storytelling were essentially erased. People were not happy, and Marvel knew it made a huge mistake, but I will say, Doctor Strange's little speech in the second issue about being there for our loved ones when they pass away, it actually got me a little teary-eyed. If only that was the way the actual story went, that would be great. And finally, coming in at our #1 spot today, do you ever make a big old mistake and then in trying to fix that mistake you actually double down on it and or make it worse? Well, you aren't alone, because Marvel knows what that's like. Basically, the story One Moment in Time is what Mephisto changed the timeline to after the events of One More Day that we just talked about. Peter left MJ waiting at the altar because he got knocked out in a fight, and both of them decided to just not try again. Then, the Marvel history past then is more or less the same, but they're just cohabitating instead of being married. Then, Aunt May gets taken out, Peter gives Kingpin the beatdown, and Kingpin is so embarrassed that he orders hits on Mary Jane and her entire family. Peter feels really guilty and goes to Doctor Strange to ask him to cast a spell to make everyone forget that he is Peter Parker, and in turn, Strange links up with Tony Stark and Reed Richards, who help by erasing Peter's identity from databases and stuff. So Strange makes a magic bubble that anyone inside of will be shielded from the memory spell, and Peter, at the last second, pulls Mary Jane into the bubble, and she resents him for not letting her life return to normal. She leaves, and then Brand New Day happens, and it's all stupid. I hate it. Coming in at #10 is The Many Lives of Donna Troy. So some of the entries on this list won't be so much about single storylines, but even the stories of some comic book characters in whole, particularly those who seem to have multiple different lives. For example, Donna Troy. Donna, like Wonder Woman, has several different origin stories, but while Diana's many beginnings are pretty similar to one another in a few ways, the story behind Donna gets more puzzling with each retcon. Donna has been an orphan found and raised on Themyscira as Diana's younger sister, and then she was changed to a creation from part of Wonder Woman's soul, and then she even became a young mirror image clone of Wonder Woman. In the pre-Flashpoint era, Donna got a new origin story that completely changed the previous one every couple of decades. It was so confusing that the new Teen Titans had a story arc called Who is Donna Troy from 1988 to 89 to try and clean everything up. But even the story to clean up the character was retconned. In the end, all these separate threads of Donna finally came together. She was revealed to be an amalgamation of all the Donna Troys across the universe thanks to a spell, with all her origin stories being memories of her other lives. Yes, it is very confusing. Just don't pay attention. #9. Pax Americana. Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly created the Multiversity Pax Americana in 2014, and DC Comics fans were mostly baffled. As part of the Multiversity series of books, different universes based on companies purchased by DC Comics were explored in their own stories, but this one focused on Earth 4, which is based on the Charlton Comics heroes of Pax Americana. Hence the name. We saw characters like Peacemaker, The Question, Blue Beetle, all that fun stuff, but in a story that almost seemed like a mirror of the Watchmen story with the Charlton characters standing in. The story was also told basically in reverse, but also not really. Ultimately, it all revolves around the president that formed the Pax Americana and the mystery of whatever happened to America's first crime fighter. It's worth a read for sure, and after the initial read through, when you're confused about what's going on, I would maybe look up a guide on how to read it properly and read it again. #8. Jean Grey. While Jean Grey coming back from the Dark Phoenix saga was one of the greatest X-Men moments of all time, it was still just a tiny bit convoluted. Basically, it all kicks off when out in space, the X-Men were bombarded with cosmic radiation. While the other members were incapacitated, Jean Grey towed the line between life and death, but managed to return everyone alive by making a sort of pact with the Phoenix Force. She was now much stronger and was reborn as the Phoenix. This led to the Phoenix Saga, where by the end of it, Jean as the Phoenix basically saved the multiverse. Unfortunately, it also eventually led to the Dark Phoenix Saga, which told the story of the fall of Jean Grey to Dark Phoenix thanks to the manipulation of the Hellfire Club, which inadvertently subjected the Phoenix Force to emotional concepts it never experienced before. Jean basically went out and destroyed an entire solar system in her rage at being manipulated. After events with the Shi'ar and the X-Men, Jean sacrificed herself in order to save the universe from the Dark Phoenix she had become and was completely atomized. It was incredibly sad and the story itself was really good, but Then, years later in Fantastic Four number 286, it was revealed that Jean Grey had somehow actually been alive this entire time, and the being that actually went through the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas was just the Phoenix Force itself that took on Jean's form. Jean herself was instead placed in a cocoon in Jamaica Bay, which is where she was reborn into the Phoenix originally. This brought the fan favorite character back to life, but devalued the whole Phoenix and Dark Phoenix sagas for fans and made people hate Jim Shooter, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time.
Number 7. Superman's continuity. For decades, Superman operated in the New Earth continuity. This is the Superman who showed up in 1986, had the Death and Return arc, married Lois Lane, and had all those classic adventures. In 2011, DC rebooted into the New 52, featuring a different Superman who hadn't had those adventures and was dating Wonder Woman and all that stuff. It was different but easy enough to follow because it was a different continuity. Then, one day, things got weird, and the New Earth Superman showed up right as the New 52 Superman was dying, revealing that he had been transported to this universe with his Lois years prior along with their son John, and had been hiding out the whole time. So, he became the new old Superman. So we had New 52 heroes except Superman, who was the New Earth version. Eventually, to try and retcon this a bit, it was revealed that the two different Supermen were actually two halves of the real Superman. They merged into one person, thus combining their continuities. This was Rebirth era, where everyone was getting their continuities mixed a bit, but just when this was getting figured out, we got Infinite Frontier, where everything is canon if you want it to be. Now, this might be the most controversial thing I've ever said on this channel, but this stuff with Superman is a prime example of why canon is extremely overrated. Number 6. The X-Men, Marvel's most notoriously convoluted series. Despite their reputation, you can pick up an X-Men comic and start reading and not be too lost. But there is a lot going on that makes the story of the team difficult to keep a handle on. Besides the massive cast of characters who each have ridiculously intricate family trees, there are cosmic forces like the Phoenix Force to keep track of. Characters like Cable, who are coming in from alternate timelines. And just when you figure all that out, everyone moves to a living island that the bad mutants are put into a weird mental prison in. Individual arcs are okay to get into, but if you look at the story of the X-Men as a whole, it is hard to deny that they have a pretty convoluted history. Speaking of the X-Men, number 5. Wolverine Origins. Wolverine has been alive for a very, very long time, and as a result, he has been through a lot, giving him a very complicated family history. For a long time, his history was a mystery, but over time, it got over-explained. In 2006, Marvel created a series called Wolverine Origins, which was about Wolverine discovering elements from his past, including how linked he is to other characters. This isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't really add to the character's mythos in any meaningful way. For example, he discovers that James Hudson of Alpha Flight, who was one of the first people to help Logan after his Weapon X experiment, was actually one of his cousins. Not only that, but Hudson's half-brother was actually Professor Thornton, the man who captured Wolverine and experimented on him to give him his metal claws. What an interesting revelation. One of his best friend's brothers is one of his worst enemies. Does it ever come up or have any impact on the plot? No, but it sure made his family tree more complicated. The story is filled with these kinds of revelations, which don't really impact the character and have the same energy as Dark Helmet telling Lone Star that he is his father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. It just means absolutely nothing. Number 4. One More Day. Despite the fact that the Spider-Man movies basically just keep telling the same stories over and over again, with a very standard status quo, Spider-Man has grown a lot as a character since he was first introduced. He graduated high school pretty early in his history, and married Mary Jane Watson eventually. They were expecting a child, but MJ had a miscarriage. Peter was a teacher for a while, and during the events of Civil War, he actually revealed his secret identity to the world. Marvel editorial looked at all of this character growth and went, "Blah! Ugh! How do we get back to the status quo people expect?" Their solution was One More Day. In this reviled story, Aunt May is dying, and Peter wants to do anything to save her. The demon Mephisto shows up and offers to save May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage never having happened. He also makes it so no one remembers that Peter is Spider-Man. The couple accepts the deal and wake up with no memories of their marriage. Now, this has caused a lot of confusion over the years regarding the canon. Basically, stuff like the marriage and miscarriage never happened because Mephisto altered time. But all of of the adventures that Spider-Man had were still canon, but were affected by a memory wipe. So stuff like the Clone Saga, that relies on the couple's marriage being a major plot point, happened, but slightly differently, I guess? Oh, and Civil War happened. Everyone just forgot that Spider-Man revealed his identity. The actual story is easy enough to follow, but the long-term effects it has on the character's history are really difficult to nail down, and not really worth it, as its only purpose was to get Spidey back to his roots as a lonely single guy, rather than exploring the character and allowing him to grow. Thanks, I hate it. Number 3, the death and return of Superman. When someone decides to start reading Superman comics, one of the first comics they are probably looking forward to reading is The Death and Return of Superman. Now, even if you are totally caught up with all of the Superman continuity, at that point, there is a lot going on in this story to try and keep track of. There's all the various replacement Supermen to keep track of, like the new Superboy, who is a clone of the original and Lex Luthor, the cyborg Superman, who's really an astronaut who Superman slighted at some point, the Eradicator, who turns out to be a Kryptonian robot designed to protect Superman, and Steel, who is honestly the easiest new character in this to keep track of. Then there's the element of Superman not really being dead, but actually being in a weird Kryptonian coma that he's healing from, and it all culminating in the city from the Green Lantern comics blowing up. Adding to all of this, the story takes place in a very specific era of Superman continuity. So if you're someone who's just skimming the classics but is familiar with the classic version of these characters, there's a lot of weird stuff happening that could be confusing. For example, at this point, Supergirl is a shape-shifting blob named Matrix who is dating Lex Luthor, who has transferred his mind into a younger version of himself who has long red hair and is claiming to be the long-lost son of Lex Luthor from Australia. Number 2, the Clone Saga. The Clone Saga was a long-running event in Spider-Man comics that ran from 1994 all the way to 1996. It tells the story of Spider-Man's clone Ben Reilly coming back to town as a series of other clones show up to fight. They discover that Ben is actually the original and Peter is the clone, prompting Peter to retire as Ben takes over the superhero duties, and then it's eventually revealed that Green Goblin had manipulated the whole thing in a very weird plan, and that Peter was in fact the original and Ben was in fact the clone. This series is convoluted more for editorial issues happening at the time. The story was meant to go on for a year, but was selling so well that the team was told to keep it going an extra year, forcing them to come up with increasingly crazy plot twists. The original intent was for Ben Reilly to stay as Spider-Man, as Marvel was once again trying to undo his marriage so they could get him back to basics. They eventually changed their minds, fearing fan reaction, and there was constant fights about the direction of the story, with Green Goblin both being alive and responsible being forced on the writers by editorial. To make things worse, all these problems made the story so convoluted that in order for any of it to make sense, people had to read an additional book called The Osborn Journal, which was just completely dedicated to the Goblin explaining his plan so that it even remotely made sense to the reader. Number 1, Hawkman's origin story. Hawkman has one of the most notoriously difficult origins to keep track of in all of comics, so I will be giving you an abridged version of his history. In his original 1940 origin, he is Egyptian royalty who has been reincarnated throughout time as a variety of different heroes before eventually becoming the archaeologist Carter Hall, spelled like this. Carter becomes Hawkman and fights crime. With me so far? When reintroduced in 1961, he is an alien cop from the planet Thanagar named Carter Hall, spelled like this. He comes to Earth and takes on the secret identity of an archaeologist named Carter Hall, with the original spelling. It makes sense when you think of him as a total reinvention of the original character. Where things start to get confusing is 2 years later when we learn that the two different versions are actually multiversal variants of each other, with the alien living on Earth 1 and the original being on Earth 2. In 1986, the Crisis on Infinite Earths happens, and all the worlds are combined into one. How to handle the continuity? Well, they changed it so that they were two different people who just happened to have similar sounding names and were both Hawkman at different points in history, with the original Egyptian prince version operating in the 40s and the alien space cop operating in the 80s. In 1994, Zero Hour happens, and all the various Hawkmen become one guy, but it doesn't stick. In 2011, the New 52 retcons Hawkman so that he is and always has been a space cop from Thanagar. In 2017, Carter with a C is reintroduced, with it being explained that he reincarnates because because the knife he was killed with in Egypt was made of nth metal from a Thanagarian ship, kinda introducing elements of both origins. In 2018, we learned that the two versions have become one again, with the Space Cop being just one of Carter with a C's many reincarnations, retconning the character to be able to be reborn not just in different eras on Earth, but on different planets as well. So to sum it up briefly, reincarnated Pharaoh becomes Space Cop, becomes two different people. He is retconned to have only ever been a Space Cop, and is retconned one last time to be a reincarnated Pharaoh who in one of his lives was an alien Space Cop. Which when you say it like that makes perfect sense. By the way, most of this also applies to Hawkgirl.
Number 10. Shot by a diamond bullet. This is actually a pretty smart way to deal with Emma Frost, but all in all a pretty dumb way for her to die when you kind of read it on paper. Both like makes sense and doesn't make sense. I mean, Emma Frost has a diamond form, which makes her pretty much indestructible, for the most part anyways. So how does one defeat her when she's in her diamond form? Apparently by exposing the flaw in her diamond form and using the same material to kill her. How do you shatter a diamond? With another diamond, apparently. I don't know if that would actually work, but comic book science. Emma's diamond form is her secondary mutation, and while we've seen many attacks on her defended by this form of hers, apparently a diamond bullet can just insta-shatter her. I mean, I've heard of diamonds cutting diamonds, but never necessarily being used to completely shatter a diamond. If shot at her exact weak point though, apparently this is just what a diamond bullet can do, which is something one of the Cuckoos, Esme, knew about and exposed to kill Emma, mind-controlling mutant Angel Salvador to carry out the execution. Don't worry though, Jean, while merged with the Phoenix, managed to bring her back with Beast's help. Jean can do anything.
Number 9. Taken out by the Punisher. Some of the most creative forms of transportation to the afterlife come at the hands of Frank Castle, the Punisher. But at the end of the day, Frank is just one seriously messed up guy. A normal guy with a good chunk of training, a hell of an arsenal, and a little bit of creativity. He is not a match for a lot of the incredibly powerful beings out in Marvel Comics, but somehow we have the Punisher kills the Marvel Universe story. When his family were taken out by being bystanders of a superhero conflict, Frank is given the backing to take out all those who call themselves superheroes, and my god, a lot of these deaths make no sense, because of course they don't. He takes out the Hulk by waiting until he is Bruce Banner again, but that's never how the Hulk has worked in Marvel Comics. He took down Dr. Doom, with his only excuse for winning being that Doom stopped to give a speech, which does kind of make sense, but the worst example comes when he takes on the mutants. By the sheer will of lazy writing and Frank's throwaway explanation of manipulation, all the combined X-teams are having their final battle against Magneto, Apocalypse, and their unholy alliance of acolytes and evil mutants on the moon in an air-sealed dome, which is where Frank drops a nuke on them, taking them all out. Ignore the fact that a good chunk of those here would be able to survive that kind of attack, and we're all good.
Number 8. EMP versus Phoenix Force. This has to be one of the most ridiculous ones. The Phoenix is typically known as being an unstoppable, undefeatable entity. I mean, the first time around, the only way that it was able to be defeated was basically by self-sacrifice. However, that hasn't stopped people from somehow banishing it or straight up killing the entity. Case in point, when Magneto defeated Jean Grey as the Phoenix by administering a powerful electromagnetic pulse, which gave her a planetary-sized stroke. Literally, those are the direct words from the comic. That is some major comic stuff right there. Only in comics would that happen.
Number 7. Odyssey. Wonder Woman Odyssey feels almost like a DC Elseworlds story. Like it shouldn't fit into the main timeline, which itself is pretty damn confusing. But it definitely isn't an Elseworlds story. Odyssey was another of DC's attempts to reboot Wonder Woman, erasing all the continuity that had been in the series since Crisis on Infinite Earths, giving us a Diana who had no connection to anyone she had been interacting with for years in the comics. The story it tells isn't too convoluted itself. It drops us into the middle of the action, making it feel like we have missed a good chunk of the story, but it goes on to tell a pretty linear line of storytelling. It's just so disjointed from the rest of pretty much anything else. But then it was basically completely unnecessary because the same year that Odyssey ended, the entire DC universe was rebooted with Flashpoint and the New 52, with nothing about Diana's new reboot being carried over. Number 6. Marvel 1602. Neil Gaiman's Marvel 1602 is one of my favorite comic book stories, but I will admit it can be a little confusing. Basically, to lay it all out, the universe that it takes place in is Earth 311, which actually got its start in in a different alternate reality. On Earth 460, Purple Man used his powers of persuasion to become president for life. In that world, most heroes had been hunted down or had died from old age, but Captain America was one holdout. Unfortunately, he is captured and banished away to Earth 616's 1599, but because he showed up in the world, it inadvertently created Earth 311. For some reason, the presence of Captain America destabilized reality and began the emergence of heroes and villains into this world who are counterparts to many of the present-day heroes and villains of the Marvel 616 universe. We have Count Otto von Doom the Handsome, Witchbreed, aka Mutants, Grand Inquisitor Enrique, aka Magneto, Carlos Javier, aka Charles Xavier, Four from the Fantastic, Sir Nicholas Fury, Peter Parquois, David Banner. These are some of the alternate versions of these characters. Now the story is super interesting, intertwining actual history with superpowered beings, but it's not without its confusing moments, and most of that has to do with how this story's world even came to be. Number 5. Doom Patrol. Doom Patrol has been around for a long time, and some people believe the X-Men are actually a ripoff of Doom Patrol since they were around first. There are a lot of things in these comics that make them just out of this world to read, from the conflicts themselves to the villains and even some of the heroes, including a hero that is a sentient teleporting street. Some of the other characters featured include the Beard Hunter, a Punisher kind of character that wages a lonely war against facial hair, the Quiz, a supervillain that has every superpower you haven't thought of, and Flex Mentallo, who uses his power of muscle mystery to turn the Pentagon into a circle. It's just wild, but it's not a bad story by any means, don't get me wrong. It's incredibly thought-provoking and really entertaining to read, but that's only when it isn't confusing. Some of the conflicts we see the Doom Patrol in are just wild. For example, in one storyline, the Brotherhood of Dada ended up trapping all of Paris in a painting, and the Doom Patrol go jumping into that painting, eventually teaming up with the Brotherhood to defeat the 5th Horseman of the Apocalypse that then gets transformed into a kid's rocking horse. The confusingness of this comic, I think, comes more so from a place of just trying to believe what you're reading half the time. Number 4. Final Crisis. If we are talking confusing, then you know one of DC Comics' many crisis events will make the list. Last time we spoke about the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but this time we're going to be talking about the Final Crisis, which isn't actually the final one. You may not be surprised at this point to hear that this confusing story was also plotted out by our friend Grant Morrison, who seems to be responsible for more than half of the stories on this list. For Final Crisis though, there are a few things that just make it confusing as hell. Basically, the story sees Darkseid invade the Earth. That's normal, but it's when the anti-life equation becomes involved that things go all over. In the build-up to Final Crisis, Morrison gave DC a very rough outline of the book so they could do a build-up, but they had their own ideas on what the book should be, so they tailored the build-up to what they thought Final Crisis should be, and Morrison completely ignored everything that DC did. So the build-up is basically useless. The 7 issues that make up the actual story, however, are very hard to follow with the perspective of the story and which characters are involved, jumping from panel to panel and page to page. There are so many different characters involved, some of which are hella obscure, or are returning with no explanation like Barry Allen. I mean, Superman defeats the villain by singing. That's what we're dealing with here. Singing Superman. Number 3. Power Girl. Thanks to Crisis on Infinite Earths, we talked about in part 1, many characters were changed and one of them was Power Girl, and it wasn't for the better. So essentially, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, Kara was no longer the cousin of Superman. Instead, Kara's background was completely altered. With Earth 2 no longer existing, Kara's origin was altered and she was now the granddaughter of the Atlantean sorcerer Arion, and had been frozen in suspended animation for millennia until the present day, making her actually an Atlantean. She got a brand new costume, and for a really long time she believed that she belonged under the sea, speaking with fish and chilling with Aquaman. This remained the same all the way until Infinite Crisis, when Earth 2 and the original Superman was brought back. Kara learned that it was apparently all a trick, and Kara had indeed been a Kryptonian all along. The Psycho Pirate showed Kara multiple versions of her origin in an effort to drive her insane, but eventually revealed revealed that she was not only Kryptonian, but also a survivor of the entire Earth 2 universe, and she regained her memories when she met Lois Lane Kent. And then we have Supergirl, who is also an alternate reality version of the same person, and we're not going to talk about that. Number 2, Generations. The DC Elseworld stories are some of my favorite ones because largely the stories are self-contained. Doesn't mean they can't be convoluted though. Elseworld's Generations is a great example. Generations basically gets rid of the idea of comic book time, following Batman and Superman's first appearances in the 1930s and then onward in real time. The two heroes basically remain unchanged throughout time, which makes sense for Superman, but for the Dark Knight, he exists forever because he essentially becomes the immortal Ra's al Ghul. It's not too bad, but it's in the third arc of the series, Generations 3, things get really wacky. Centuries pass between each of the 12 issues in the arcs, which is confusing enough if you aren't prepared for it. But then, in the final issues, that's when Darkseid invades and time travel rears its convoluted head. In the final battle, Batman and Superman are transported back to the 1930s, and the first issue from Generations 1. When the day is finally saved, Supes and Batman lose all their memories and start all over again, basically meaning Generations is one big convoluted circle. And finally, in at number 1, Carol and Marcus. This one is not only confusing, but it's a little disturbing too, which I think might also help to make it even more confusing. So basically, in Avengers 197 from 1980, Carol Danvers, back when she was Miss Marvel, discovers that she's pregnant. She doesn't remember how it happened, and that sweet baby is growing pretty quick. Not 3 issues later, in Avengers 200, Carol pops the little sucker out within days of even finding out that she was pregnant. All the Avengers are like weirdly excited about it, as if it's not the weirdest thing ever, and they treat Carol like she's the unreasonable one for not being excited. The baby, who has been named Marcus, grows up into adulthood in basically hours and reveals that he is actually the son of Immortus, the ruler of Limbo and one of the different incarnations of Kang the Conqueror. Immortus had Marcus with a woman he had apparently plucked out of time, but Marcus was trapped in Limbo until he could be born on Earth. So, Marcus had brought Danvers to Limbo, romanced her with a combination of charm and quote, subtle manipulation from Immortus' machines, and he got Miss Marvel pregnant so he could be born on Earth. The fact that they go on to explore the romance before it was retconned is one thing, but like scientifically, that actually makes no sense, and it's confusing as hell.
Number 10, Sandman. Let's start off with a villain turned Avengers member. The Sandman first appeared in The Amazing Spider-Man number 4 back in 1963. However, as time went on, his backstory was tweaked from pure villain to more of a redemption style arc with a more sympathetic backstory. A man trying to do the best he could with what he had. All of this ultimately led him to the Avengers. This was after he had received a presidential pardon for his past crimes. The Avengers for a time had a bit of a what better way to redeem someone than give them a spot on the team, the ultimate sign of trust. Now the Sandman is only a reserve member, so he's only getting called up under dire circumstances. Silver Sable will probably call him first. Or she would've. Because comics are as ever retconning and resetting, and the Sandman was back to its villainous ways. And eventually he lost the ability to hold his form for a time, but he'll be back. Nevertheless, it's more comic book characters' lack of ability to maintain their progression except in extreme circumstances that makes him a poor member. It's the medium's fault, not his. Number 9, Jack of Hearts. So, Jack of Hearts, with the power of the playing card. Just kidding. He first appeared in Deadly Hands of Kung Fu number 22 in 1976. In all seriousness, it took Jack a while to gain control of his powers, that being that he can explode himself. So this kind of attack can be useful. It's less useful, however, when you kill your own teammate. So Jack of Hearts killed the second Ant-Man, Scott Lang, with one of his explosions. This was after he had been resurrected by the Scarlet Witch during the Avengers Disassembled storyline. Sometimes dead is better. They never learn. This time Jack stayed dead for a while. I mean, his first death was supposed to be heroic as his powers were out of control, but man, how anticlimactic. But don't worry about Scott, he got better. Number 8, Silverclaw, Maria de Guadalupe Santiago. This character. So Silverclaw entered into the Avengers scene thanks to her connection with Jarvis, the Avengers' butler, who was her pen pal at the childcare center where she was raised. She grew up on tales of the Avengers that he would tell her in the letters that he wrote. No confidentiality at the Avengers mansion. When coming to visit Jarvis, this, a terrorist situation broke out and she got to showcase her abilities and become a tentative part of the team, when she wasn't at school that is. She even initiated the next story arc, one that revolved around her and her mother. Now people just didn't take to Silverclaw, and some felt that she was monopolizing the time that could be spent on more established Avengers. Also, not many characters made it out of the 90s.
Number 7. Being a part of X-Statix. Lots of deaths in X-Statix were stupid, but that was the point. The whole thing was a bit of a satire on reality TV. The team itself isn't exactly one of the premier mutant teams out in the world, and that's putting it lightly. The members of the team aren't exactly the most impressive. The original team made up of mutants Zeitgeist, who has the power of Super Puke, La Nuit, who has Dark Force powers, Battering Ram, who was a big purple goat-looking man, Plasm, who had liquidy water powers, Gin Genie, who could create earthquakes depending on how much she drank, and Sluck, who is basically a squid. They went by X-Force, which as you may know shares its name with a much more impressive team. But all those original members, minus 3 of them who I didn't mention, and Sluck, who was blown up by a tank in South Africa, all got completely decimated in spectacularly embarrassing fashion during a rescue mission to save a pop music boy band named Boys R Us. Turns out their demise was actually planned by the team's manager, coach, and its leader, Zeitgeist himself, because they thought a team with a constantly changing roster and high body count would gain them fan interest. The team managed to go on with pretty horrible results. There have been 28 members of X-Statix who have passed away over their history, with only 9 of them surviving. So yeah, don't ever join this team.
Number 6. Eaten by birds. Miss Arrow has a pretty wild death in the comics. For those of you who are unfamiliar or haven't heard of her, that is probably because you know her by a different name, the Other. That is right, Miss Arrow is actually the extremely powerful spider totem entity that is linked to Peter Parker's Spider-Man. As such, she is entirely made up of spiders, despite sometimes appearing to be human while under the guise of Miss Arrow. Because of this, she was at one time killed by a bunch of birds who devoured the spiders that made her up, with Peter squishing the final spider that survived the bird attack. This wouldn't be the end of the Other though, as one more day messed up the whole continuity thanks to reality being warped, with Peter having actually never accepted the Other in this alternate, which is now the main, reality.
Number 5. Being dumb. Magneto in the Ultimate Universe was like the bad guy. He was nuts, and he had the power to back it up, which he proved when he used his abilities to offset the magnetic poles, which put the whole world into chaos. Tidal waves in New York, mega flash freezes in Latveria, volcanoes erupting in the Amazon, all that good stuff. Naturally, the survivors were not happy, and they would be coming after Magneto with a vengeance. They aren't dumb, so of course their attack on the villain would be planned out. Right? Well, it doesn't seem like it was. While all the surviving heroes make their assault on Magneto's fortress, the hot-headed Warren Worthington, you know, the guy whose only power is that he has wings, decides that he is going to jump the gun and come full speed blasting through a window, giving Magneto a good old punch to the face. Magneto could have squashed this guy like a bug in one swift move, but he doesn't even think Angel is worth the effort. Instead, he lets Sabretooth, his mad dog, do the deed. Sabretooth pounces on him, rips one of Warren's wings off with his mouth, and then stomps on the mutant's neck, taking him off the board in one page. Idiot.
Number 4. Waking up Fin Fang Foom. Something you shouldn't ever do? Wake up a sleeping dragon, as Jerry Carpenter learned in Hulk vs. Fin Fang Foom issue number 1, which admittedly is a pretty wild and weird story, so if you're into that, you should go check it out. Here, as promised, the two beings end up fighting, but first, we're treated to a story clearly inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing. Probably also why this guy's named Jerry Carpenter. You see what's happening here? Except Fin Fang Foom is the shapeshifter in this tale. For those who don't know, Fin Fang Foom is actually an alien whose race is actually known for their shapeshifting abilities. I feel like not a lot of people think about that, but that is a thing. Needless to say, Jerry finds Foom below the ice and sends for the rest of his team up in the Arctic. They're basically like a research team, but instead of just waiting, he is hasty to proceed because he basically wants to name this newfound finding of what he believes is an undiscovered type of dinosaur after himself. He smashes through the ice with a pick, only to awaken Foom. Foom blasts forth and takes Carpenter for his host, basically wearing him like a skin suit. The really weird thing though is I think this is the only case of Foom like actually needing to do this. He claims he's attempting to rebuild his strength by merging with hosts and is like looking for a real strong host when he runs into the Hulk, but I don't think he's ever actually needed to do that before or after this point ever again. And he can just shapeshift on his own. He doesn't actually need a human host to turn into a human, so there's a lot of weird stuff happening in this comic. But hey, if you gotta make Hulk and Foom fight, I guess you gotta do some weird stuff.
Number 3. Falling on Rogue. Nothing stands up to falling on a woman who leeches life away, unable to pick herself up. Well, falling isn't the right word. It was more like Mr. Sinister was held down. Following the events of M-Day, a mutant named Hope Summers is born, bringing hope to the mutant species. Well, Mr. Sinister, he reassembled the Marauders and planned to control the future of mutant kind by stealing Hope. Sinister knew this and wanted to use Hope to control the mutant population because the mutants can't just have something without a villain trying to mess it all up. Sinister regrouped his Marauders alongside Mystique, who knew that Hope was necessary to save her daughter, Rogue, from her out-of-control powers. Well, Sinister failed to capture Hope, and like an idiot, he informs Mystique that he is unable to help her save Rogue. Safe to say that Mystique doesn't appreciate that very much. She grabs and shoves Sinister's face onto the unconscious Rogue, and unable to get up, his life is sucked away. Now I'll admit, it's a little bit awesome, but in the massive gallery of villains losing their life, it's arguably one of the lamest ones. Imagine Sinister having to tell people about this one when he eventually returns. Embarrassing.
Number 2, turned into a sundae. I don't actually know if Ice Cream died here, but it certainly seems to be implied that he did. At least to me it does. This is the canon that lives in my mind. Ice Cream was a character who could turn into ice cream, hence his name. Ice Cream, get it? He infiltrated the X-Mansion in the first and only issue of Obnoxio the Clown. Speaking of weird comics, that's another one. He wanted revenge on the X-Men because they had cooler mutant powers than he did. Although how he really planned to get said revenge and beat them when his powers only allowed him to turn into ice cream, I'm not really sure. He attempted to turn the danger room on the students, but this plan ended up failing, with Professor X lowering the temperature of the control room to below freezing, which caused Ice Cream to freeze solid. At the end of the story, Obnoxio the Clown decorates Ice Cream as a giant sundae, while Ice Cream's fate is left ultimately undetermined. We never see him again, and it's possible that he literally could have met his end by being mistaken and consumed as actual ice cream at some point later in his life, so yeah.
Number 1. Just take off the quiver. A lot of the time when a hero's light goes out, it will be in an ultimate display of self-sacrifice, throwing themselves into impossible circumstances in order to save the majority. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, that kind of thing. It's the number 1 heroic move, but it only really works when there is absolutely no other option. When looking at Hawkeye's sacrifice in Avengers Disassembled, there were a whole handful of other options, and most of them were pretty obvious, making for a heroic self-sacrifice that just ended up coming across as incredibly dumb and unnecessary. Basically, Wanda Maximoff has gone completely bonkers and turned on the Avengers, but none of them know that just yet. She's already caused the passing of both Vision and Scott Lang, Ant-Man, and all the Avengers have assembled in order to figure out what the heck was happening. Using her Hex powers, she created a Kree warship to show up out of nowhere and go on the attack. Hawkeye runs off to go get some more arrows, and when he comes back, he goes off, taking out Kree left, right, and center until he is hit in his explosive arrow quiver by an energy weapon. With his quiver on fire and set to explode, instead of just taking it off or firing off the arrows, Hawkeye grabs a Kree with a jetpack and blasts off into the warship, blowing both it and himself clean off the battlefield. Just silly.
Number 10. Pink Elephants. Now of course I have to start off with one of the most wild issues. It's titled Pink Elephants. It's issue 212 of Green Lantern Corps, but don't let the name fool you, there's no weird elephant stuff in this one per se. So we have Hal Jordan, and he's being eyed down by Aricia Rabb. See, the only thing is, Aricia is only 13 years old. Young love, classic. Way too young though, way too young. Hal Jordan is of course not 13. So she uses her power ring to make herself appear older, but it's still not okay, you know? You know, that's like 13 going on 30, but Hal Jordan knows that it's actually her and she's making herself look older. That's gross, that's super gross, and also super illegal. Ayo, Aricia's like, oh, I love you because you're the most handsomest man I've ever met, and because you treated me as a real Green Lantern even though I was so young, and because you couldn't keep from calling me honey. And even Hal Jordan's like, oh, okay, I didn't say, let's stop there, let's just chill. Don't say it out loud, please. Gross. Even saying it out loud here is just, yuck. Number 9, Bat Baby. Issue 147 of Batman has one of the funniest lines on a comic book title page ever. So we have Robin, just regular old Robin, and a baby sporting the mask and the cowl, and the businessman on the cover is like, look out, it's Bat Baby and Robin. Like, I love the stutter that he does too. He's like, look out, It's Bat Baby. Like he kind of like has to take a second to realize what he's looking at, which is kind of like us too. We're looking at the thing like it's a Bat Baby, I guess. Yeah, debit, let's do it. And the weirdest part is he still has the abilities of a full-grown Batman. So Batman and Robin get up close to Nails Finney and his gang, and then Batman sees Garth, the renegade scientist. Garth! Turns out Nails brought them into a trap, and now Batman has shrunk down to the size of a small child. Very small. The headlines were amazing in the news that week. Gangland turns Batman into baby, and the photo is just Batman all moody, like, it's the best. Robin at one point even has to carry Batman to the Batmobile. So what does Batman do? He embraces it. He's like, fine, I'll dress like a baby, I'll become Bat Baby, let's do it. He does well though, or he does okay rather. One of the headlines that you see next reads, Bat Baby does okay for a kid. That's it? Just okay? Like, I mean, he's okay. He just rode a balloon up in the air like 40 feet and then fought off 3 crooks, but he did okay for a kid. He was okay for a kid. Yeah, he had to ride a balloon because his legs were so small. I don't think we'll ever get this comic on the big screen, but who knows? I mean, we got Scott Lang as a baby in the last Avengers. Maybe DC will really go for it and have a Bat Baby make a brief cameo. We're hoping. And number 8, Bat Witch. This one's a classic. Released in 1969, issue 186 of The World's Finest, we find Batman in a bit of an odd situation. So, Superman and Batman at this point have traveled back in time to solve a mystery of a broken bust that resembled Batman. They're like, alright, let's go back in time, figure this out. So they go back and they rescue a lady named Sylvia Ward. Now, Sylvia was actually accused of witchcraft, and she's in trouble. So Superman helps her stay afloat, and then Batman swims beside her to shore, right? What a good team. 2 nice guys, classic. And then she thanks Batman by kissing him right on the lips. Ooh-wee. And then Superman goes to introduce himself, and then Batman interrupts and takes her to the local bar. Oh, shit. So Superman decides to use this era in his favor. So he dresses up as Batman and starts like floating around and doing like all like this crazy witch stuff. So much so that the town deems him a witch. So Batman is about to be burned at the stake. He's got like his hands and his head, he's stuck in the whole scenario. And then a thunderstorm rolls in and everyone's like, ah, is it raining? Can't be doing any of that. And then they leave. They don't want to see a guy dressed like a bat like get killed. They think he's a witch, but they're like, you know what? I didn't bring my umbrella, so can't do it this time. Next time. We'll get him next time. Let's head out. Everybody leaves except for, you guessed it, Ben Franklin. Yeah, he was there. He actually tried to help free Batman with one of his experiments, you know? But Superman doesn't let that happen. He puts his hand in and stops the electricity. So Ben Franklin thought that he could use electricity to like blast open the shackles. Not today, not with soups involved. Eventually Ben Franklin's like, all right, you're on your own. I don't know what's going on here. And then when Batman asks Superman why he's doing this, Superman says, figure it out yourself. So next time your friends start flirting with your crush, just frame them for witchcraft. It'll work, trust me. Number 7, Monkey Business. We go now to Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, Volume 1, Issue 116 to be exact. This issue came out in 1968 and I don't think we'll ever see this on the big screen. I hope so, because if we do, I'm walking out of that big screen. The cover alone is enough. It shows Superman flying, saying, Jimmy, what's got into you? Why are you acting like an ape? And then the actual ape on the cover is like, because he's an ape, Superman, yeah, I'm the real Jimmy Olsen. We switched bodies. Yeah, they switched bodies. Apes are so strong also. Like, have you seen Planet of the Apes? Caesar just like rocks dudes off of buildings like it's no problem. There's no way he would be holding a camera. That camera would explode in his hands in a matter of seconds. Like, they're so strong. So after a malfunction of a machine, yep, they ended up switching bodies. So Jimmy Olsen's body starts, of course, literally screaming like an ape because the ape is stuck inside. And the real Jimmy Olsen, he's stuck in an ape body. And the dude, he just embraces it. He buys a green suit, he even has a cool hat to go along with it, and he continues working. Like, what a champ. He even says he'll be a simian sensation. The guy loves it. Editors, insert link. So of course somebody walks into the office and they're like, holy shit, there's a gorilla. We have to call the zoo guards right now. This can't be in here. And then Jimmy responds with puns. He's like, holy cow, I guess I'll have to explain what this monkey business is all about. Like they're gonna be like, ha, good one, Jimmy. No, like that happened in real life. That dude would be put to sleep with a dart so fast. Number 6, Orca the Whale Woman. Imagine if when Robert Pattinson's Batman came out, this was the story that we got. I would laugh so hard. So we go now to Batman issue 579. So imagine you're on a yacht, you're just chilling, right? You're hanging with your friends, having some drinks, feeling good, looking good, showing off your fancy $6 million necklace, and then bam, a whale woman just blasts into frame and rips it away. She's like, don't let her, give me that necklace. Like, first of all, so scared. Bruce is shocked. He's like, miss, can you please return that gem to its rightful owner? That'd be great, thanks. And of course the whale doesn't cooperate, so Bruce heads to the Gotham Aquarium to ask some questions. He meets Grace Baleen, who is a woman bound to a wheelchair who works at the aquarium. She gives the whole rundown on orcas and how they fight other whales that are 3 times the size of them, and how she's working on this research project with orcas, but the funding, of course, is not going well. So you probably figured out what's going on by this point. She spends her time robbing from the rich, and instead of keeping that wealth for herself, she donates it to charities. Not a bad idea. She ends up becoming an orca forever, but that doesn't last long, don't worry. She's killed by an operation ran by the Great White Shark in Detective Comics issue 819. A lot of sea drama in that one. Under the sea, we have a lot of murder, under the sea. No dancing crab choreography included. Number 5, the Suicide Snare. This issue was released with Action Comics Volume 1, issue number 592, back in 1987. The cover of the issue, first of all, is enough to draw you in. It shows Superman with Big Barda, like, you know, with her. They're making out, and who's in the background? Mr. Miracle, just watching the whole thing. He even says the line, Superman and my wife? Those lines are laid across the cover, so what's going on? Well, Mr. Miracle goes home one day to find Darkseid just chilling on his couch. Immediately asking where Barda is, Darkseid gives him a tape to play, which may be the scariest moment of my life. Like if Darkseid was like, here's a tape, I'd be like, no, I don't have a tape player. What did you do? What did you do? Oh God, it's gonna be so bad. So he clicks play and sees Big Barda dancing for Sleaze. They don't show it, but it's implied that it's sexual in nature, like, you know. So Sleaze takes mind control Barda and Superman to an adult film director. Yeah, his name is even Grossman, like Grossman, Grossman. His idea is that the adult film is going to make so much money that basically it can pay for an army to go against Darkseid, which is a pretty, worth a shot. So in comes Mr. Miracle to save the day, releasing the two from Sleaze's mind control. Whew, that would have been a real awkward brunch if Mr. Miracle didn't show up. Quite the miracle if you ask me. Number 4, Super Lion. This 1958 Actions comic grabbed readers' attention in the 243rd issue when the title page showed Superman as a lion, and the headline was The Lady and the Lion. So you have to open it, you just have to. So after Superman uses his telescopic vision, he sees trouble. Trouble in the form of a young lady on a Mediterranean island in danger during an earthquake. So Superman flies over and saves the day. He soon realizes by the rubble that this is the Temple of Circe. So it wasn't actually Circe, it was the next rendition of Circe. And she ends up making him consume this potion while demanding him to marry her. Nice pitch, not bad. If you do not come back to me for the antidote before the next dawn, she continues, you will turn into the creature you most resemble by nature. See, if that was me, I'd turn into like a toad or like a little turtle or something. Something just kind of like, you know, something not the best. So as fate has it, Superman becomes a lion. Yeah, his lion's heart and strength made him do the whole spiel. It could be a lot worse though. The Man of Steel ends up working at the zoo and he ends up playing with people. Like, he has a pretty good time. Really dumb concept or best idea ever? I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle. Let us know in the comments. Would you see this in theaters? Superman as a lion, just like putting people's heads in his mouth? Let us know, I kind of would. Number 3, Superman vs. Muhammad Ali. You gotta love it. This one shot made its debut back in 1978, written by Dennis O'Neil and Neil Adams. It featured the Man of Steel and, of course, Muhammad Ali. So what's going on? How is this a real thing? Well, it was part of an all-new collector's edition numbered C56. So basically this alien named Ratlar, who is part of a species known as the Scrub, visits Earth and demands that we pick our best fighter to go against theirs. Nice. So their best fighter being a behemoth named Hunya. And if we refuse, well, the Scrub is just gonna destroy the planet. So Muhammad Ali argues that since Superman isn't technically from Earth, he must be the one who fights. So Ratlar is amused by this, so he wants to know who's the best. So he pins up the two champs against each other, Superman versus Muhammad Ali. Now of course you're thinking Superman would toast this guy, hands down, no competition. Well, the fight is set to take place on Bodace, which is orbiting a red star. So that means there's no powers for Superman. So Muhammad Ali trains Superman to become a boxer, like a human boxer. And cue the Rocky Balboa music. So they start training in Superman's Fortress of Solitude, throwing proper left hooks, you know, the whole thing. Might as well train without powers, right? So the unlikely duo are given 24 hours to train, which is just unreasonable. But by using a time warping device, they're able to train for a couple of months. Rattler figures out the device is being used and boom, training is over, boys, nice try. So the fight is broadcasted intergalactically and thousands tune in naturally. I mean, Superman puts up a good fight, but ultimately Ali is the greatest boxer to ever live. So Supes goes down. And now Ali has to fight Hanya, even predicting which round he'll go down by. Now of course Ali doesn't hold up too well against an alien at first, but he eventually knocks him out of the ring in the 4th round, just as he said. Take that, bucko. Boom! Number 2, Ants. Yeah, Ants. Coming at you from Action Comic Volume 1, Issue 296, The Invasion of Ants. It's as dumb as it sounds, or maybe brilliant, I can't tell. The cover alone is super weird and kind of inviting. It shows Superman on the side of a building, but he's got like an ant's head. So off the bat, I'm pretty curious what the hell's going on. He's even saying the words, "Follow me, soldier ants, buzz buzz buzz. We must capture Lois Lane, buzz buzz, she will be our queen." Okay, you got it, man. So after a colony of giant ants was mutated from a nuclear war on another planet, they decided to come check out Earth. So Superman uses red kryptonite radiation to give himself an ant's head. Not a mask, important to say, like a head. He has an ant's head. He's got an ant's head, guys. And he communicates with them with that head. This is like the ultimate amalgam character. Like, Superman even explains how bad this could get if murder ants roamed the city, as if we didn't already know. It even has a photo of ants like lifting up the Empire State Building and like, so as long as Superman focuses on maintaining an ant's head, he can communicate with it. Similar to how Krypto turned into a collie. If this was a live action movie, people would light the theater on fire. There's no way he's like, buzz, buzz, buzz. Everyone's like, no, I'm leaving. You weren't ready. We're not ready for this. And finally coming in at number 1, the New Guardians. So back in 1988, DC had a short run with one of the best villains ever, Snowflame. So what makes Snowflame so strong and wild is, this guy even says the words, "Is my God," on the first page. The New Guardians have trouble. Of course they have trouble. His every cell burns with white hot ecstasy. In his words, not mine. Ram attacks and it doesn't do much. A blow like that would have sent an ordinary man reeling, says Snowflame. Would it be funny if he was like, a blow like that can't work against a man on blow, and it was like, and just rocked him. Yeah, he even says the more you fight back, the more you fan the fires of my high. This is a real thing. I mean, this could be a live action movie. Just like an old jack dude on coke, just boxing the Justice League.
Number 10, Martian Manhunter and Fire. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I am also not the biggest fan of fire either, and I would absolutely hate being set on fire for so many reasons. But for such a powerful hero who can shapeshift at a molecular level, change his entire genetic makeup to let him pass through solid objects, withstand ferocious attacks, or bend light waves around his body, it just seems a little silly, right? Not to mention that he comes from Mars, otherwise known as the Red Planet or the Fire Star. So why is this one of his biggest weaknesses? Well, long before Martian Manhunter even existed, a race of aliens known as the Burning caused some serious damage with fire in order to create their offspring, which, needless to say, people weren't too happy about. After the Guardians of the Universe separated the offspring into the White Martians and the Green Martians, they were all imbued with a congenital pyrophobia, aka a fear of fire. So it kind of makes sense why he's so afraid of it. Not only does it physically hurt him, but it also scrambles his most prized weapon of all, his mind. This fear and weakness is so intense that when he's exposed to flame, he has the capacity to self-destruct, either combusting into bits or dissolving into rivers of Martian liquid. Want to know more about the Martian Manhunter? Well then check him out in his first appearance in 1986's Justice League of America, number 255. Number 9, The Flash and Being Too Fast. At first, I've got to say this one confused me so much because that's kind of the Flash's whole thing, right? Well, when it comes to Barry Allen, his speed might be his greatest strength, but being too fast puts his life in mortal danger. In Crisis on Infinite Earths, we see the Flash use his super speed to thwart the Anti-Monitor's evil plan, but the speed vortex he creates to stop the villain's antimatter cannon from firing is so fast that it sweeps the Flash away along with it. He ends up being stranded for 23 years in the Speed Force, you know, that mystical energy field that gives all the speedsters their powers, and spends that whole time running and trying to figure out how to get back. Basically, what happened is that Barry ran way too fast for his body to handle and he atomized himself. Thought to be dead by his closest friends, including Wally West, who took up the Flash mantle in his absence, Barry's apparent death was a huge shock for everyone, and also entirely his own fault. Check out more of the Flash for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1956's Showcase, number 4. Number 8. Power Girl and Raw Materials. You'd think that being weak to kryptonite would be their only weakness, considering how easy it seemed for people to get their hands on it. But Kara Zor-El from Earth 2 actually had another pretty big weakness at one point. They were vulnerable to unprocessed natural materials such as branches and rocks for a short while. This also includes stone, dirt, and sand. Basically anything that can be found on Earth that isn't man-made. In Peter David's Supergirl Volume 4 number 16, she gets knocked to the ground and impaled by a pretty big tree branch, which, in her defense, would put anyone on the ground. Supergirl helps yank out the branch, and with this weirdly sociopathic smile on her face, she asked, "What, are you vulnerable to wood?" It took a second, but after she was no longer in pain, she replied, "Worse, to any raw, unprocessed natural materials. So, sticks and stones really can break my bones." God, dumb joke and even dumber weakness. Check her out for yourself in her first appearance in 2011's Flashpoint Volume 2, number 5. Number 7. Adam Strange and Forced Deportation. Who knew that archaeologists could also be superheroes? Well, apparently Adam Strange did, because that is exactly what he is. He inadvertently found himself on the planet Ran and was gifted with all the powers of a superhero in Mystery in Space, and it's not exactly explained why. Sounds pretty great, right? I mean, what could possibly be his weakness? Well, it's not actually his fault or in his control. This life of bliss he lives on Ran is frequently interrupted by his rather inconvenient transportations back to Earth, where he has no powers at all. The technology responsible for bringing him to Ran, the Zeta Beam, only allows him to remain there for as long as it's transmitting back to Earth. And as it takes the beam a few good years to reach Strange's home planet, it's not exactly easy to catch a ride back. Strange might have been recruited as Ran's savior, but his timing issues really make this role more of a temporary gig. He could be midway through his heroics before vanishing without a single trace. He even left his wife to nearly get eaten by a tiger once. Luckily, as Alan Moore's Swamp Thing series clarified, the Ranians are more than capable of looking after themselves when Strange isn't around, and thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't be relying on Strange much either. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1986's Outsiders, number 6. Number 6. Human Torch and Asbestos. Now, don't get me wrong, Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, is a force to be reckoned with. Not only can he create, absorb, and manipulate fire, which is pretty awesome on its own, but his Nova Flame is hot enough to vaporize the particles of anything in his way, whether it's a bullet, a building, a bad guy, etc. Interestingly enough though, his powers can't seem to penetrate asbestos. Now this doesn't seem like much of a weakness now, given that asbestos is now banned across most of the world, but back when the Human Torch was first created by Stan Lee and Ernest Hart in 1963, it was a much more common thing, as it was used to insulate pipes and wires, soundproof rooms, and even make cheap garden furniture. In Strange Tales number 111, Asbestos Man came into play, dialed up Johnny Storm, and arranged a showdown between the two. The Human Torch wasn't really all that into it, but he agreed nonetheless and showed up completely underprepared. Asbestos Man used his super asbestos suit, a fire retardant shield, and a fisherman's net to go toe-to-toe with the Human Torch, and he wreaked havoc on the Human Torch until he developed mesothelioma and needed an oxygen tank to stay alive. Moral of the story, kids, is always prepare for anything, and please, don't breathe asbestos. Check out more of the Human Torch's story, starting with 1961's Fantastic Four, number 1. Number 5. Wonder Woman and being tied up. Superheroes don't come much more kick than Wonder Woman. She's an extremely skilled warrior with enough power to take on the gods and win, and she's shown time and time again that she can hold her own in the world of comic book heroes. However, the Golden Age Wonder Woman was bound by an interesting Amazonian rule that really did not work in her favor. Known as Aphrodite's Law, it states that when an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world. This gender-specific weakness lasted from Wonder Woman's debut in 1942 right through to the mid-80s, when DC finally retconned this out for good. This weakness is less literal than metaphorical, meant to demonstrate Marston's argument that women are only vulnerable to men when they choose to be. But still, I am very glad that this was gotten rid of for good. Check out Wonder Woman more for yourself, starting with her first appearance in 1942's All-Star Comics, Volume 1, number 8. Number 4. Gladiator and Self-Confidence. Cal-Arc, aka Gladiator, is arguably one of the most powerful comic book heroes ever, gifted with planet-shattering strength, super speed, heat vision, frost breath, and a few psionic abilities as well. He's a superhero anyone would love to be. However, even though he is loved, he never really learned to love himself, and that is sometimes his biggest downfall. Although low self-esteem isn't exactly fun for anyone, trust me, I know, for Gladiator it's actually a fatal weakness. His power fluctuates according to his confidence, as seen in Dan Abnett's and Andy Lanning's War of Kings crossover in 2009. Get him to doubt himself or even his abilities for 1 second and he can be defeated by opponents with far weaker abilities than him. A prime example of this is shown in War of Kings number 3 when Rocket Raccoon manages to convince Gladiator his gun will hurt himself and despite withstanding far worse in the past, succumbs to self-fulfilling prophecy and is beaten. Give his story a read for yourself, starting with 1977's X-Men number 107. Number 3, Daredevil and Loud Noises. Now we all likely know this, but Matt Murdock's loss of vision took away the natural gift of eyesight that we all take for granted, and replaced it with echolocation, an uncanny radar sense that allows him to basically see things through sound. Unfortunately for many heroes, their greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness, and such is the case for Daredevil, as his extreme sensitivity to sound can completely incapacitate him. In Daredevil Volume 2 West Case Scenario, he is subjected to a high decibel ultrasound, 120 decibels to be exact, by the dastardly Purple Man, who knows his weapon is excruciating for a man of Daredevil's gift. Daredevil's head spins and he looks like a man under a sorcerer's spell, leaving him completely vulnerable to a follow-up attack. The same can actually be done using intense smells as well, since his sense of smell was also heightened after losing his eyesight. Although Daredevil can and does go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone in a fight, he will get utterly emasculated by a stink bomb or a supersonic sound. Check out more of Matt Murdock for yourself, starting with his first appearance in 1964's Daredevil number 1. Loud noises! Number 2, Green Lantern and Wood. If you're a bit confused, that is totally okay. This is not a weakness that is common across all of the Green Lanterns, it's specific to the very first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. Despite being armed with a magical ring and a spectrum of pretty much limitless powers, Scott seemed to have another fatal weakness other than the color yellow. He first realized that this might be a problem for him after he was hit in the face with a wooden log, and then after a series of wins and victory laps, Scott realized tree bark might be his potential undoing. Put a little more succinctly, items made of wood cannot be lifted or broken by energy from the ring, nor can barriers of emerald energy stop projectiles crafted from wood. Apparently this vulnerability to wood was because the green flame was an incarnation of green growing things, and thus could not be turned against them. Guess you could say he, can't get wood. Check out the first Green Lantern for yourself, starting with 1940's All-American Comics number 16. Number 1, Captain Marvel Jr. and his own name. Poor Freddie Freeman. Out of all of the weaknesses on this list today, he probably drew the shortest straw because his weakness is his own name. If Captain Marvel Jr. tries to introduce himself to a superpowered ally or for some reason feels the need to say his name in the middle of a battle, he'll instantly be transformed back into Freddie Freeman, a ordinary young lad who relies on a crutch to walk. Or if he speaks his superhero alias aloud in the guise of Freddie Freeman, he'll transform into a shimmering beacon of muscly justice and give himself away. Jerry Ordway tried getting around this flaw during Captain Marvel Jr.'s sporadic appearances in Teen Titans between 1995 and 1998 by having Freeman refer to himself as CM3, since he was one of the 3 members of the Captain Marvel family at the time. Also, he could avoid accidental transformations, but that change didn't really stick around. Honestly, for someone who inspired many of Elvis's onstage looks, that is one weakness that I don't know if I can overlook. Check him out for yourself in his first DC appearance in 1995's The Power of Shazam, number 3.
In a 10 long neck. According to comments I've seen on these videos along with my own, it looks like this may be my mutant counterpart. I really don't know why you people were so obsessed with my neck when I first started, both on this channel and our sister channel, but I guess I am long neck. Before the events of M-Day, William Hanover was a mutant with a slightly longer neck than normal. He was a student at Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters and helped Cyclops oppose Zorn's rampage. You had a long neck and you were admitted to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters? Okay. He first appeared in New X-Men number 140 in June 2003, and there is no other information about him. His power was legit having a long neck, and that's it. Kinda sad, really. I guess Candace from Phineas and Ferb should also be on this list. In at 9, Skin. Angelo Espinosa was born in Los Angeles. His girlfriend became a gang member, which put a strain on their relationship, obviously. And one night his girlfriend and her friends picked up Angelo for a drive, which turned into a drive-by shooting. The stress of this event caused his powers to manifest. He passed out, and when he woke up, the car was on fire and his girlfriend was gone. A homeless man was trying to steal Angelo's wallet while he was unconscious, but Angelo woke up and fled from the car. As he did, the car exploded, killing the homeless man with the wallet on him. The only way they could identify the homeless man was by using that wallet, so Angelo was declared deceased. His power is one of the most absurd I've ever seen. Aside from sounding like a Wizards of Waverly Place spell, you know, Humanos by Espinosa, Espinosa had gained an extra 6 feet or so of skin that he can use to extend limbs like a restricted Mr. Fantastic. Skin was later found crucified on the grounds of the school along with other mutants, and despite Archangel's new healing ability, he wasn't able to save him. But like, come on, 6 feet of extra skin? That's dumb. In Innate Maggot, this one has to be the most confusing of the bunch. The kid known as Japeth, if I even said that right, was tortured by terrible stomach pains and required special food. He was told by doctors that his pains were caused by cancer, so in an effort to save his family money on medical treatment, he left his small African village at 12 years old to commit suicide. He ended up being found by Magneto, who helped him uncover the true nature of his pain. 2 slug-like creatures that lived in the boy's guts that acted like his digestive system. After Magneto got revenge for Maggot's father's death, Maggot was horrified by his actions and didn't join Magneto's cause. Sometime later, he ended up seeking out Magneto in an attempt to get him to help Maggot master his power, his slugs. He had named them Eenie and Meanie, and they work as his digestive tract, meaning he will essentially vomit them out and let them hunt. They will find food, eat it, and then return to Maggot, giving him all the nutrients from that food after he's like swallowed them back up. Since Maggot cannot eat proper food on his own. Yeah. It's weird, gross, and disgusting, but oh well. That's why it deserves to be on this list. And it's 7, Ugly John. What kind of name is this? Ugly John? What kind of rude as hell kind of rude ass name is that? I mean, sure, his only ability is having 3 faces that aren't all appealing to look at, but do you really need to put that in a name? You know what? I'm changing his name. My headcanon will forever be just John. You know what? Let's change it right now, alright? And at number 7, John. There. That's better. This guy got captured by the Wild Sentinels and was critically injured, and he was killed by Cyclops in an attempt to end his suffering. Because of the pain, or because of the faces? And at 6, Glob Herman. Look, trained mercenaries or villains know where to shoot or stab you. Some trained individuals know where to stab you to make it look like you're dead but not actually kill you. But it's a general rule of thumb, you know. Shoot to kill, aim to thrill, or aim for the head and right in the chest. Well, what if you had transparent skin so the villains knew exactly where to put each bullet or knife to avoid your bones? Well, there you have Glob Herman's power. His real name being Robert Herman, he probably took one of those memes that's like your stripper name is the color of your shirt and the last dessert you ate, but it was like your superhero name is the last thing you wrote on backwards plus your last name. And boom! Blog backwards Herman was born. Blog backwards is Glob, so. And at 5, Gold Balls. Fabio Medina was a mutant whose powers manifested after the war between the Avengers and X-Men. After he was the victim of a robbery, his powers manifested. Powers that include the ability to produce gold balls from any part of his body. These balls can also vary in size. They emit a poink sound every time they hit a surface and seem to be able to bounce. If that's not weird enough, it was later discovered that the balls that Fabio produces are in fact unfertilized eggs. I'm assuming human eggs because, you know, he's a human, but he's also a male, so it confuses me. He currently goes by Egg after joining the Five, where he helps Kuroko revive dead mutants. I'm assuming he's using these human eggs he produces. A giant human egg flying at you, do you know how terrifying that would be? Does it still have 32 chromosomes? Would a normal-sized swimmer be able to fertilize it? So many hard-hitting questions. And at 4, Zeitgeist. Look, puking is never fun, especially not after binge drinking. But while it may feel like acid in your throat, the stomach acid doesn't really burn through any non-organic material. Well, imagine vomit that may actually end up being able to digest corn. Well, let me introduce you to Zeitgeist, the most common mutant right now because he looks like he's wearing a surgical mask and we all need to be wearing one right now. He would have nightmares about a makeout session gone wrong after he ended up spewing acid vomit on a girl's face during a drunken day at the beach. Yikes, that'll definitely be a downer on your first date. She survived, but the face burn left Axel Clooney wondering if the nightmares would stop if he remembered her name. You ain't remembering her name, buddy. While sure, he may have been the leader of the Ecstatics, this is still such a dumb power to have. When I saw the guy with acid spit in Sky High get classified as a hero, I'm like, what the f***, why? How is acid spit a heroic ability? Sure, super strength, I get it, but acid spit? It's more of a hero support power. This also goes to show that nobody other than the public cares about damages superheroes cause. He literally started burning through the school and he's like, hero! Getting close to the end at number 3, Blob. Fred Duke's power manifested when he reached puberty. His major weaknesses were the same as most humans. Short temper, lack of foresight, lack of intelligence, and easily manipulated self-esteem, something all humans have. He was depowered in House of M, but before this Blob's blubber was impenetrable. Even Wolverine's claws couldn't slice the dice. He's gone by the aliases of Frederick, Fatso, Tubby, Big Man, Brainless Lumox, and Horseman of Bounty. I'm not like your normal horseman. I'm a load of blubber. He's a rescue. I'm not savable. And at 2, Choir. Irina Clayton is one of the students at the Xavier Institute who assisted then acting headmistress Jean Grey fight against the invading force of Sublime's U-Men. She first appeared in New X-Men number 112 and had her final appearance in the New X-Men number 150, being depowered due to M-Day. During her 3 years as a mutant, she had not 1, not 2, but 3 extra mouths on her neck. These powers enabled her to become the superhero version of Jeff Dunham, using these mouths to talk without moving her lips, thus confusing and disorienting her enemies. Having extra mouths on your neck? Are you kidding me? Confusing your enemies by talking without moving your lips. Really? That's freaking ridiculous. Like, how? Finally, in at number 1, Jazz. There is little to say about Jazz's mutant ability. His superpower, thanks to his mutation, is that he is blue. Yep. John Xander's dream was to be a rapper, but he wasn't very good. While in Mutant Town, he was a drug owner for one of the local crime lords who was selling toad juice, a drug made from the secretions of a mutant called Toad Boy. Even Toad Boy is more useful than Jazz. His only ability other than being blue is his ability to rap at a mediocre level. Same. This guy is nothing special, but what makes me mad about all of this is, and it should make you mad too, is the fact that he kept his powers after M-Day. Yeah, the mutant tag who can decide elections with one handshake loses his powers because he isn't useful enough, but the blue-skinned Eminem ripoff is able to keep his powers? No, not even powers, blue skin. He's probably as mad as I am about it, and you should be mad about it too. If he knows about it, that is.
Number 10. The Swordsman. Now, the Swordsman joined the Avengers for a brief period in the 1960s. He was a swashbuckler, whose tagline proclaimed him the newest, most daring, different swashbuckler. Initially a mentor to Hawkeye, and even teaching him how to do some trick archery shots with swords, Clint caught him stealing and was disillusioned. Sometime later though, the Swordsman attempted to join the Avengers. He did this in order to get the benefits that being on the team afforded, because you actually got perks with the ID card. I like to imagine that they all ate free at restaurants. However, he was refused, largely because of Clint being on the Avengers. His response? Kidnap and try to kill Captain America. And yet, a little while later, they still let him join. But, shock of all shocks, he turned out to be a double agent, planted by the Mandarin. He betrayed the Avengers, but then betrayed the Mandarin. And guess what? He got kicked out. Since then, he has both fought against and with them, briefly rejoining the Avengers. He was last seen on the team made up of formerly dead Avengers. Seriously, you'll always have to be watching your back with the Swordsman. Number 9. Two-Gun Kid. So, Western heroes are extremely hit or miss. And despite being around for a while, Two-Gun Kid was a miss. He had honorary status on the Avengers since 1976, and was upgraded to full reserve member in 1978. So the Two-Gun Kid fights crime in the 19th century, and he only ended up joining the Avengers because of a time travel incident, and afterwards he stuck around to wander the world with Hawkeye. Lots of people hanging out with Hawkeye. Eventually he went back to his own time and brought a bunch of weapons with him. He then became one of Marvel's favorite tropes, say it with me now, a man out of time. And he cannot return to his timeline. It's all less complicated when you read it in order. However, really the Two-Gun Kid needs to be bolstered up with tech, usually given to him by the Avengers. Things need to be pretty dire before you're digging that deep into your reserve list. Nice guy, not the best Avenger. Number 8. Tigra. She was compelled to audition for a spot on the Avengers by Moondragon, who used her telekinesis and telepathy to force people to try out when the Avengers found themselves short a member. And Tigra got the spot. Of note was that she managed to stop the Molecule Man by getting him to go to therapy, and he went. However, she never fully felt like her powers were up to snuff with the other Avengers, and she resigned with no hard feelings, but later went on to join the West Coast Avengers. So the thing is, she is having a battle with the cat side of her personality, due to her feline human hybrid brain. She has a cat-like appearance and is imbued with cat-like strength, which in comics is significant, as well as reflexes, claws, and teeth. So not everyone took to this and just felt it wasn't that cool. There's always someone on the team who maybe the others don't think has the best powers. Despite having a long career and arcs dedicated to her, cat powers are a bit of a hard sell, and she never really rose to the ranks of iconic Avenger. Number 7. Black Knight. So there have been a couple of Black Knights, actually more than a couple, and yes, they are all medieval themed, a concept that is really hit or miss in the modern era. For our purposes, we need Dane Whitman from 1967, who joins the Avengers in a wacky new hero take on the character. He's even related to the first Black Knight. How bold and daring. Okay, to be fair, this concept was nowhere near as played out in the 60s as it is now. So why is he here? Well, it's not just the whole operating in a different tier than, depending upon the threat level, could be mostly, well, not useful. For many, it just wasn't interesting. There wasn't much pathos there. Sure, maybe to some he was super compelling, but for many, the Black Knight is meh. Middle of the road. Number 6. Gilgamesh, the Forgotten One. He is a member of the Eternals and might get that MCU bump thanks to the Eternals movie that is in the pipeline at the time of this recording. He first appeared in Eternals 13 in 1977. He joined the Avengers because they needed people. He joined at a time when they were desperate for members. Gilgamesh is powered up for sure, but not everyone took to him. He's participated in some big events, but again, not everyone seemed to embrace him. It's hard to step onto an established team. Sometimes it's just not that deep. Number 5. Squirrel Girl. So Squirrel Girl, first, she is beloved by many, and she can be a very fun character. However, at the start, she was very much conceived of as a bit of a joke. Even the plot where she defeats Dr. Doom is meant to be comedic. There's a character in The Tick called Squirrel Girl who has the exact same powers. Now, there's nothing wrong with Squirrel Girl, and she is a friend to many Avengers. However, as a full-fledged member of the team, is it really necessary? I mean, unless you're Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. They use her as a babysitter. And for a lot of Avengers adventures, she just guards the mansion. Fun character? A hero for sure. But does she need to be a member of the Avengers? Number 4. Red Hulk. Yes, you heard that right. The Red Hulk. Thaddeus Ross. Just kidding. We're talking about Robert Maverick. This is the second Red Hulk, and a very new character at the time of this recording, appearing first in 2016. He joined the US Avengers and manages to sport a mustache even as the Red Hulk. It's not a red stash though. The stash cannot be contained. So what's wrong with Red Hulk 2.0? Well, to many, he just kinda felt like a gimmick. Look, the Red Hulk, but good. It's Black Knight syndrome. Sure, for some he was super cool. For others, again, it was meh. 3. Thanos. Okay, this is a bit of a sidestep reach, but that's part of the fun of alternate versions. So this comes from a recent, at the time of this recording, What If run. What If Infinity War, that sees a world where Thanos joins the Avengers. Thanos makes a deal with the Avengers to protect Earth during the Infinity Arc. The problem? He's still very much Thanos, so he still becomes a despot and, well, takes over. Your ally conquering your planet? Yep, but that makes you a bad Avenger. You're not a team player, Thanos. They would have let your past slide. They'll let anyone join. Number 2. Stingray. So this character, Walter Newell, first appears as Stingray in 1969. He was a marine biologist who encounters Namor, the Submariner. And while this encounter changes the course of his life, he ends up a little enamored with him and determined to prove to the world that Namor isn't the villain everyone thinks he is, and in the process constructs his own superhero identity. He ends up on the Avengers because he assists them on a mission. And you know, if you do that, you're pretty much in. Show up, bring your toothbrush. So Stingray is powered and augmented by his suit. He's flitted in and out on teams since then. But again, he just never really took off, and he's one of those Avengers people like to make fun of. Is it the costume? Because if it is, I kinda like it. I don't know, maybe people just don't have much attachment, and maybe I'm gonna get people saying that like the US agent, Stingray also saved their families. It could go either way. Number 1. Star Fox. So yes, he made it this time. We had to save him, there is much to talk about. So Star Fox is Eros, and brother to Thanos. But here's the thing, they went hard on the Eros angle and gave him pheromone persuasion powers that, well, specifically at the start, targeted women because heteronormativity. But the worst thing, they used it. Yup, Star Fox seduced ladies with this power. And not even in the altered carbon, oh, you know it's happening but can't stop it, but sometimes in the you don't even remember what happened way. This earned him the nickname in some circles of the walking roofie. He sometimes used this power quite brazenly and with the attitude that the woman should be grateful. You know, oh, you're Star Fox, thanks so much for raping me. Ooh, I was assaulted by an Avenger. Man, it's bad for PR, and just bad in general. Even if this ability is completely retconned away or used better, which would be difficult, but if well written, could happen, for many, the character is tainted. It's like that that panel of Hank Pym slapping the Wasp, context be damned, the character for many is just ruined. So Star Fox is number 1, cause for many he's not just a terrible Avenger, but an awful character. What an awkward way to end a list.
First, All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder is like the black sheep in Batman's world of comics, but it's definitely not what you would call a fan favorite. In this story, Batman isn't the hero we all know and love. He's more like a brutal, crude guy who does some seriously messed up things. First off, the way Batman treats Robin is just wrong. The novel tries to reimagine the Batman and Robin team-up origin story, but in this one, Batman literally kidnaps Dick Grayson after his parents die. He even slaps Robin across the face and justifies it by saying, "Because I'm goddamn Batman." And if you think that's bad, he goes on to have some woohoo time with Black Canary in a really disturbing setting, surrounded by burning corpses. Oh, and how could I forget the scene where Batman literally forced Robin to eat rats? It's like, there was nothing about Bruce in this story that was heroic. Fans despised this version of Batman, which led to the series being cancelled before it was even finished. Now, on the flip side, you could see it as a satire of Batman, where Miller took Bruce Wayne's psychological trauma and logically resulting mental personality disorders and took them to their obvious conclusion. It was the Batman no one ever wanted to admit could be plausible if he wasn't a comic book character with decades of history and fan expectations. Next, let's talk The Dark Knight Strikes Again, a sequel to the highly praised Dark Knight Returns, which didn't quite live up to the hype. Written by Frank Miller, it continued the story of an older Batman coming out of hiding. This time, Batman opposes Lex Luthor's oppressive rule over a dystopian America. But the catch is that the sequel did not capture the same magic as its predecessor. Instead of delivering a compelling story, it felt like a watered-down version of Miller's gritty style. Batman's character turned harsher, Dick Grayson became a cruel, twisted version of the Joker, and Kari Kelly was awkwardly forced into a Catgirl role, not to mention the whole comic's weird art style. So the problem is that The Dark Knight Strikes Again lacked the depth and emotional punch of the original. It seemed more like a cash grab than a meaningful continuation. The sequel failed to justify its existence beyond Miller just trying to keep the story going for the paycheck. If you're enjoying this video so far, please support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. Kevin Smith, a filmmaker who's deep into superhero stuff, took a swing at Batman with the widening Geyer storyline, but it totally missed its mark. This unfinished story feels way off. It's got Batman making pals with this new vigilante named Baphomet while juggling this romance with an old flame Silver Cloud. And the two even get engaged, only to have her killed off by Baphomet, who's revealed to be Anomatopia, a horrible villain that Smith made up, who he just had to shove in here, which just didn't quite fit. And he got carried away with his jokes, horribly retconning a crucial moment from Batman Year One, where Smith insisted that Batman wet his pants, which just wasn't cool. Fans did not take this lightly. They felt it was a disrespect to Batman's entire legacy. The mix of the self-indulgent writing, the forced characters, and the messing with classic moments just didn't sit well with fans.
Number 7, Dr. Drood. Originally introduced as Dr. Droom, but they changed the name to avoid confusion with Dr. Doom. He joined the Avengers in 1987, but had to leave in disgrace because he ended up succumbing to mind control. He was manipulated by the villain Terminatrix into manipulating the team. He managed to maneuver his way to be chairman of the team, but ended up throwing himself into limbo along with Nebula, who Terminatrix was masquerading as. He regained his control, but he was disgraced. He's worked with the team since, but it wasn't the same. He did get a memorial statue at the manor after he died though. Never forget that the Avengers used to operate out of a mansion. He helped out as a ghost for a while and was later resurrected. Number 6, Demolition Man, or D-Man. Okay, seriously, this costume. Why? It's a horrifying fusion between Wolverine and Daredevil. After receiving strength augmentation that makes him too strong for regular sports, he becomes a professional wrestler. He goes on a couple of adventures with Captain America, and the two end up becoming friends. And Cap asks him to be on the team personally after the East Coast Avengers had disbanded. So the consensus that readers seem to come to is that D-Man got on the team because of nepotism, and that really he wasn't qualified enough to be there. He even became a bit of a running joke, being one of the heroes being mocked when Luke Cage and Jessica Jones were looking for a nanny for their baby. It's just, the Avengers have gotten more more and more powerful over time, and eventually being a pro wrestler just didn't cut it, enhanced powers or not. Number 5. Triathlon, later known as the second 3D man, which actually makes sense because after being kicked out of athletics for using steroids, he was actually imbued with the stolen powers of the first 3D man, but he didn't know that at the time. He just thought he'd unlocked some secret hidden potential. He was added to the team after assisting them as they had recently been on the end of a smear campaign saying that they were religiously intolerant and racist. So since Triathlon was black and religious, they let him join for good press. They ended up really liking him though, and he liked them, and was able to resist mind control and infiltration to defeat the ultimate plot to bring them down. He ended up leaving the team though after they were restructured under a UN charter. He's been on various teams since then, but his Avengers days are over. Or you never know. They can change their mind. So why is he here? Well, that was just a super awkward storyline to get to know him. Ugh, the 90s. Number 4, Thunderstrike. Oh, poor Thunderstrike. He is not Thor. So Marvel has tried to rebrand Thor a couple of times, and in the 90s, that was with Eric Masterson, who became his own hero later on, Thunderstrike, and he was still highly derivative of Thor. He initially joined the Avengers in Thor's place, and that very much cemented him as replacement Thor, and he just never came into his own, and the characters even looked very similar. He later ended up coming into conflict with the Avengers when it seemed he had killed Seth, and they attempted to detain him. Well, he fought them, but defeated them, begged Thor to kill him, and then was killed by his own blood axe, which was cursed. He was briefly resurrected, but later went back to the afterlife. You know it's bad when they let you stay dead. Number 3, Justice, formerly Marvel Boy. He definitely got a name upgrade. He ended up being caught up in a mystic event at Avengers Mansion instigated by Morgan Le Fay, which put many Avengers under her command. However, some of them broke the spell thanks to their belief in the team, a belief Justice shared despite not being on the team. After the event, he joined the team. So much use of the word team. And well, why do people not like Justice? It's because he was quite the fanboy, to the point where he was so starstruck that he actually made mistakes that threatened the very people he was working with. He got better, and is still a member, but some people never got over their first impression. Number 2, Rage. Rage was the youngest person to ever join the Avengers, joining the elite team at 13, after first encountering them and berating them for not having enough diversity on the team. After the UN Charter restructuring, they invited him to join as a probationary member. So Rage's powers involve exposure to toxic chemicals, causing his body to grow to adulthood in a matter of weeks, and giving him the usual superhuman strength, speed, stamina, etc. He ended up being demoted to trainee when the rest of the team found out he was a teenager. No Batman shenanigans on the Avengers. So Rage's thing was that he was written to be a teen, and written to be a teen in the 90s. So you can imagine how palatable that was. There were some stock characters in the 90s, and Rage very much got caught up in that, and he never fully recovered for some Raiders. Number 1, the US Agent. He was appointed to the West Coast team during the whole UN Charter stuff. He was initially introduced as a Captain America villain, a dark antithesis to highlight the dangers of patriotism. He was later introduced as a new Captain America in 1987 to boost sales. It went about as well as Hail Hydra. Actually, no, it did really well. The only problem was the character got more and more heroic throughout the process. However, people wanted Steve back, so he was given a new name and costume, and he became the US Agent. He even got his own limited series once he joined the West Coast Avengers. So this all sounds pretty good to some of you. Maybe. So why is he here? And number 1 to boot? Well, some would argue that the greatest crime a character can commit is being boring. And his core concept was never that strong to start off with, so once he lost it and became a derivative of Captain America, he kind of ceased to have a function. There was already a Captain America, so the world just didn't seem to need the US Agent. He was also a bit of a stoic character, which doesn't always translate the best. And let's be real, how many of you remembered that he existed? I'm sure some of you did, but in general, despite being a part of several major arcs, he just kind of blends into the background.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Superman's Secret. Ooh. So in Superman issue 300 back in 1939, we see the front cover of this issue and it shows in big text, "Revealed at last, the startling secret of how Superman fools the world with his Clark Kent identity." And you see Superman on the cover like, "Lana, look at my face. Do you believe me?" He's on point, like he's very aggressive. He's like, "I'm Clark Kent, look at my face." It's basically what we've all been thinking when we see this guy in his disguise. The whole issue is about how dumb the glasses disguise is. And it's pretty funny at first. But the thing that sucked was that he explained how his glasses are made from Kryptonian plexiglass and how that intensifies the low-level hypnotic effect. So people see him as Clark Kent rather than Superman. So he could be dressed in his gear and people are like, No, you're definitely Clark Kent. I'm looking right at you. Your chest is the size of a car, but you know what? I think you're still Clark Kent. It wasn't until Burton's 1986 reboot until this power was dropped. Thankfully. Because if they had kept that idea, then it would have made the comics where Bruce Wayne pretends to be Superman pretty unnecessary. Also, if Superman has these powers in comics or movies, that would just be hilarious. It would just be Henry Cavill at the bar in his Superman gear just flexing, then a guy pours a beer on his head while we're just staring at him in costume. That would have just been weird. That guy should have been punched out to space also. Forget about his truck being stuck in trees. He should have grabbed him and just went, gone. Number 9, One Punch Man. Superboy Prime punches through reality itself. It is one of the most talked about events in DC's comic book history, and it has fans split over the overall decision. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened and brought together all these Golden Age and Silver Age heroes into the same place. It was a move made to retcon certain plot points while setting up a brighter and certainly bolder future. So what happens when you lock Superboy Prime up in a pocket universe? Well, once he's out, he gets so mad that he punches, but he doesn't just punch a hole in the wall like your classic Kyle from high school. No. He punches through reality, creating the multiverse, bringing back the dead Robin from the 80s, Jason Todd, to life. And that wasn't the only change though when it comes to the multiverse collapsing. Like Elastigirl's resurrection, and then the other characters come back as if they had truly never died. Like we had Lynx, Reactron, Ventriloquist, Scarface, and Magpie. This punch also changed some major history with Joe Chill, which I'll get into later. The numerous versions of General Zod were also replaced by just the one version. So, what a mess. Just what a mess. Number 8, Catwoman's origin. Okay, this one's super funny to me. So, Frank Miller released Batman Year 1, and it was his dark and gritty issue. And included with it had Selena Kyle's true origins. She lived life on the streets and resorted to work just to make ends meet. People loved this dark origin story. This was a superhero origin story. Then the New 52 released Catwoman 0 in 2011, and the origin went from dark and DC-like to just, well, this. She is seen as this amateur thief, and she has an epiphany while falling out of a window, and she smacks the ground quite hard. And then, out of nowhere, a group of stray cats appear and start to lick her back to life. Look at her face, getting all sticky. First of all, the sound. Second of all, the smell. Wouldn't be the best. Basically just doing what Tim Burton did, but on the page. No way.
Next up is the Reptilian. Garth Ennis, known for his gritty and brutal over-the-top style in comics like The Punisher, The Preacher, and The Boys, took a swing at Batman, and well, let's just say it didn't hit the mark. In fact, the writer has stated previously that he hates Batman, so why anyone would let him anywhere near a Batman story is beyond me. This relatively recent title, Reptilian, had a promise with its cool idea of a creature feature storyline, but instead of giving us an epic Batman tale, the edgelord Batman giving "because I'm Batman" vibes in every bit of dialogue is exhausting. This book was legitimately a slog to get through. It's not scary, whimsical, inspiring, or even bad on a funny level. It's just boring. The writer brought in his trademark overindulgent and satirical superheroes, but it was just too much of nothing at all. Next, Batman Odyssey is, well, let's just say, is the epitome of what the hell on earth did I just read. The story feels like a fever dream jumping from one place to another. Neil Adams, the guy behind this whole madness, takes Batman to a whole new level of strange. This hallucinogenic trip of a story begins with Batman having a moment where he almost kills somebody, forcing us to dive into this scary Bruce's psyche, where suddenly he's riding a T-Rex. Yeah, you heard me right. At one point, he even breaks the fourth wall by talking directly to readers about Alfred. This comic is a big promotion for Adam's own beliefs about a hollow earth, so it's off the wall, and it's totally out there, and it's like reading something out of a crazy fever dream. The story is all over the place, making it nearly impossible to follow. Next up, Fortunate Son. This one is a story in which Batman encounters a rock musician claiming to have a messianic connection, and Batman suspects that it's a plot to lead Gotham's youth into crime. Now, while a musical premise might have worked in the 70s, this one completely falls flat. The conflict's core is Batman's disdain for rock music, believing the genre is inherently evil, because apparently it's what he heard when his parents were killed. This rationale seems super far-fetched and completely out of sync with Batman, as this comic tries so hard to justify Batman's hatred for rock music through psychological exposition that just ends up feeling forced. The entire premise, where Batman's aversion to the genre drives the conflict, seems too far-fetched to take seriously, which brings up yet another contention as the story attempts to take itself way more seriously than it needs to. The exploration of Batman and Robin's relationship feels watered down, reduced to a cliched moral lesson. Next is Operation Blindfold. In one of the oddest Batman stories, Batman did some awful things. Imagine Batman fighting blind people. Yeah, that happened. In the comics back in the 60s, a guy called the Schemer roped in some shady folks to pretend they were all blind, and their big plan was to steal a truck full of gold. Now, the kicker is that innocent blind folks got hurt and Batman and Robin got tossed into jail. And that's when the chaos level skyrocketed. To top it all off, the bad guys were faking it, because they weren't blind at all. And the cherry on top of this weird cake was that the story ends with Batman and the crew cracking jokes about being blind. Next up, let's talk about Batman Venom, a comic story by Dennis O'Neil and the gang, which takes a super weird twist. Now, some fans actually like this one, but I don't know. Something about Batman succumbing to substance addiction kind of violates his whole principle with his unwavering moral code. This one takes the notion that Batman, the guy who's always prepared and kicks bad guys' butts, is forced to go to extremes in order to continue his crime-fighting spree. Batman's like, I need a boost, and tries out the highly addictive but strength-boosting chemical compound called Venom to amp up his crime-fighting skills. Yeah, that's right, the same stuff Bane is on? Well, Batman takes a hit. And just as suspected, it goes downhill real quick. And the dude who usually outsmarts everyone without relying on sheer brute strength is suddenly granted said strength, turning him into a total wreck. Fans who love Batman for being all strong-willed and focused don't like seeing Bruce crash like this. Not cool, Batman. Not cool. Next up, the comic book known as Cacophony didn't hit the right notes with many Batman fans. Written by Kevin Smith, it's often remembered as one of the worst Batman stories ever. In this series, the aforementioned villain Omnitopia, his name is so hard to pronounce. He's introduced, this guy who uses sound as trouble, but the villain just doesn't work out. The humor felt off, making the Batman, the Joker, and other characters act super weird, and on top of that, the main villain's gimmick just didn't impress readers much. Now, what came after the sequel, The Widening Gyre, continued the story and did not fix any of the problems of the original, making Cacophony's flaws even more glaring. While it did introduce this new sound-making villain, the Batman story wasn't music to fans' ears. Now let's take this opportunity to finally describe why Omnitopia is an absolute dumpster trash of a character. See, this dude is a villain who relies on sound as his weapon. He doesn't really talk so much, but he mimics sounds around him, so whenever a gun fires, he says bang or pow out loud. He doesn't have any superpowers. He's just good at fighting and uses stealth to surprise his enemies. His gimmick, which is mimicking sounds, kind of sound cool, but in the long run it feels super shallow. He doesn't have a deep backstory or compelling motive like other Batman villains. He's more like a one-trick pony, relying solely on his gimmick to mimic sound. Plus, he totally lacks depths. I mean, readers don't really get to know much about him or what makes him tick. See, a great villain often has layers, motivations, or something that makes you understand them, but this dude just falls short in this regard. He just ends up feeling like a forgettable bad guy with a lame name. And last on our list is Batman and Catwoman, The Trial of the Gun. This might sound like an exciting adventure, but let's dive into why some folks consider it one of the worst Batman stories ever. The story centers around Batman and Catwoman chasing around a gun that never misses its target, which sounds cool, but the problem here lies with how the characters are portrayed. See, Batman usually sticks to a strict moral code against using firearms, but in this story, he's okay with Catwoman's sudden interest in the weapon. Catwoman's character also takes a weird turn as she's shown as a big supporter of firearms, which is kind of out of sync with her usual persona. It feels like the writers didn't quite get the essence of these iconic characters. While this idea might have had potential, the way it clashes with the established traits of Batman and Catwoman left much to be desired from the story.
Number 10. Hank Pym's secret daughter. Nadia Van Dyne is Hank's daughter, who we didn't know existed until 2016. She was introduced in a free comic book day issue about Civil War II. Now, of course, I like Nadia Van Dyne as a character, don't get me wrong, but her being added in retroactively as Hank's lost daughter was something that I felt like was a bit much. When we learned of Nadia's backstory, we learned that she was the daughter of Hank Pym and his first wife, Maria Travoia. Maria was kidnapped during her and Hank's honeymoon and killed. Nadia ended up being raised in Russia, trained in the Red Room. Eventually, she escaped after learning of who her parents really were. By the time she got back to America though to see her father, Nadia learned of his sacrifice to save the world from Ultron and his death as a result. She decided to seek out her stepmother, Janet Van Dyne, and became close enough to her that she felt compelled to change her own last name to Van Dyne. Because that's not confusing at all. She's Hank's daughter, she's not at all related to Janet, and yet she has her last name. Number 9. Falcon's X-Gene. Remember that time Falcon was revealed to be a mutant and then we explained that origin away with, a faulty Sentinel? If you don't, let me explain. In issue 174 of Captain America, we see Professor X meeting Falcon and Cap. Charles implied Falcon's connection to his bird seemed telepathic, and that Falcon's telepathic abilities may be mutant in origin. Falcon himself took this suggestion to heart and even considered what it might mean for him to be a mutant, pondering on his strong, seemingly psychic link to his bird Redwing. He then encountered a Sentinel who identified him as a mutant, and so he was a mutant for a time. This was established. And this wouldn't really be revisited or retouched till 2001. Where the idea of Falcon being a mutant was tossed in the trash and explained away as a Sentinel simply malfunctioning. Wah wah wah. Number 8. Black Widow's confusing backstory. Natasha being a mysterious spy from Russia who switched sides means that yes, we are going to get a complex backstory for her, but it actually wasn't always that complex. Natasha was inspired to fight for her nation originally when her husband was assumed dead in combat. Her husband wasn't really dead, of course, and it was implied that this was all part of a plot to basically encourage her to fight for her country. Before that, Natasha was a renowned ballerina. Later on, however, this whole origin was revealed to be a lie when we learned that the Red Room had embedded memories of her being a ballerina in her mind. They made her think she had trained in ballet, but she hadn't really, because I guess that's what the Red Room does. They mess with you and give you fake memories. Her story was also changed from a woman who was inspired by her husband's sacrifice to put her own life on the line for her country as well, to that of a woman being blackmailed and threatened into becoming a spy in order to protect her husband.
Number 7. After the New 52 retcon, we saw Barbara Gordon in an entirely new way. So Alan Moore released The Killing Joke, and in this comic we see a paralyzed Barbara Gordon from the waist down. She then became Oracle and did a pretty bang up job with the Bat family. Also, she's in a wheelchair. How often do you see that? More inclusion for the win, folks. Let's get it. But with the New 52 retcon, we have Barbara Gordon back as Batgirl. So while some fans are happy with the change, most have expressed quite a bit of rage online, rightfully so. Number 6. Identity Crisis. Brad Meltzer's Identity Crisis was a 7-part issue released back in 2004. The first issue actually did really well with pre-orders, passing I think like 160,000. But come issue 2, fans weren't nearly as interested the first time around. There was a huge decline in numbers. Why though? Well, the cruelty of the content was deemed a bit too much for comic book readers at the time. It had basically turned into a murder mystery about the death of Sue Dibney. Fans weren't on board with how dark the story got with certain details, some drawing the conclusion that it was done just for shock value. Fans have said that every character involved in that comic was just ruined. So what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Comment down below. Number 5. Evil Amazons. Yeah, you heard that correctly. The New 52 comes through yet again to disappoint fans. The New 52 Wonder Woman series began in June 2016, and Brian Azzarello made the Amazons' origin so that they attacked sailors on the high seas that were too close to their land. Okay, and if that wasn't bad enough, Azzarello even went so far as to make the Amazons murder these sailors and then toss their bodies in the water. And if they have any sons, well, those sons are being sold right into slavery. I don't think we'll be seeing this in the Wonder Woman sequel. I mean, maybe? Imagine if they went from like the first movie to like a band of hardcore pirates just whipping people off boats. Get out of town. The Wonder Woman clay origin was preferred over the new stuff. These false memories that were written to her story were liked. I mean, rightfully so. Number 4. What is love? More like, where is love? Green Arrow and Black Canary are an iconic couple, or rather, were. The two have been together since their early issues in the 60s, and then the reboot came along in 2011, and they weren't lovers anymore. What? For 5 years, readers had to watch them not be in love, and it was a weird time. Eventually, DC listened, and then when DC Rebirth happened, the couple was back together again. Now, this made fans happy, of course, but that was 5 years of storytelling, and now those issues are just scrapped. Awesome, sick, 5 years. A lot of words, a lot of eye movements, thanks. Number 3, Dead or Alive. Superboy issue 158 came out in 1949, so it was a little while back now. And the cover of the issue is enough to pull any reader in. It shows Superboy in space looking down at a capsule with his parents in it. And the words, "They're alive, my real mother and father." And behold, a couple of sleeping beauties. Jor-El and Lara were drifting in space for 15 years. The radio transmission comes in, calling Kal-El, and then he's like, yo, that's my name, let's do it, let's go. And it's a nice moment or two. Superboy reflects on recognizing his parents' voices, even though he was just a wee baby when he last saw them. So how sweet. But in the New 52 Rebirth storylines, apparently Jor-El survived the Krypton explosion, thanks to Dr. Manhattan, and he then became Mr. Oz, who was like a villain. This New 52 retcon makes absolute no sense. We saw Krypton's death, and we also saw his parents dying in it with our eyes. Number 2, Jack and Joe. We all know the name Joe Chill, the guy who killed Bruce Wayne's parents, Martha and Thomas Wayne. Now, after watching the 1989 Tim Burton Batman film, there's now another name in our minds when we think of the person that killed his parents. We of course think back to the Joker, and having him as the one who killed his parents in the movie. So which is the right one? Which one's true? So fans had to wonder this for years. If Joe Chill was actually the killer, these are confusing times. And then in Infinite Crisis issue 6, we see that Chill is again the killer of the Wayne's family. Thankfully, I mean, part of Batman's story was based off this way of things. And after Infinite Crisis, they made it so Chill was arrested the same night he killed Bruce Wayne's parents. These stories are way too confusing at times. Even reading this, my brain hurts. And finally, number 1, no kill. We all know Batman by his one rule, and breaking that rule is Joker's goal in the Dark Knight film, to never kill. Of course, having his parents die at the hands of a killer, one would assume he's not too fond of the act. But let's go back. Let's go back to Batman's first appearance. Back in 1939, Detective Comics issue 27, we straight up see Bruce push a guy into acid. Acid! It's said in the early days that many criminals died by the hands of the Bat. Bill Finger came in and retconned it so the Caped Crusader, starting in Batman issue 6, tells Robin that we never kill with weapons of any kind. With weapons? Ooh, gotta read the fine print, I don't know. No, Batman at that point still goes by the no kill rule. But what do you guys think? Was his actions, like in Batman vs Superman, unwarranted? I mean, this is obviously a darker, older version of the Batman where clearly people close to him have died. I personally think he should kill. Make it so he pops dudes. People love the Punisher. I mean, you know, he wrecks people. Go get him, Batsy.